The Planning Commission for Wednesday, July 12th, 2023 is now called to order. Would you rise with me and say the Pledge of Allegiance? Mr. Attorney, do we have a quorum?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you. All matters requiring commission action shall be presented to the Planning Commission by the planning staff and the applicant. In situations where planning staff is the applicant, there will be only one presentation. City staff will make the first presentation. The applicant will make the second presentation. Both presentations are limited to 5 minutes each. To maintain an orderly meeting, all presentations shall proceed without interruption unless the commission desires to intervene with questions or comments. The chair will open the public hearing for those physically present wishing to speak about an item. Those in favor of an item shall be heard first, followed by those opposed to an item. A 10-minute time limit will be allowed for public comment in favor of an item, and then a 10-minute time limit will be allowed for public comment in opposition to the item. A staff member will track the 10-minute time periods. Who's our timekeeper tonight?
I'll do it until Ms. Painter is able to get off door duty, and then she'll probably take over, but I'll do it until then.
Thank you. So the staff member will track the 10-minute time periods and notify the speaker at the 5-minute mark, the 1-minute mark, and then verbally call time when it expires. The chair, in their discretion, may extend these time periods. All groups, organizations, neighborhoods, or similar associations desiring to comment are asked to appoint one spokesperson to present their concerns or point of view to the commission on each agenda item. The public has been encouraged to submit their comments in writing via a web-based form located on the City of Wilmington's website. All comments received prior to 9 a.m. today were forwarded unedited to the Planning Commission. All comments received will be delivered to City Council when the item advances. All comments received will be made available to the public if requested. All votes will be voice votes after proper motions are made and consistency statements read into the record. The chair will state the outcome of the vote and the action. Rezoning requests that receive an unfavorable recommendation from the Planning Commission may be appealed by the applicant to the Wilmington City Council. Appeals should be in the form of a letter submitted to the city clerk within 10 days of this hearing. Any items being appealed will tentatively be heard at the second city council meeting in the following month, which would be August 15th. All right, commissioners, the minutes from June 7th were in your packet. Are there any comments or revisions? If not, I'll take a motion to approve.
Make a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
All in favor of approving the minutes of June 7th, 2023, say aye.
Aye.
Our first item of business is a conditional district rezoning of property containing 5.82 acres located at 6120 Oleander Drive from CB/CD, Community Business Conditional District, to O&I CD, Office and Institutional Conditional District for a proposed mixed-use project of 192 dwelling units and 20,700 square feet of office and commercial space. Our staff member, Nicole Smith, will present the item. Welcome, Ms. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, Commissioners. The proposal includes one parcel containing approximately 5.82 acres and is located south of Oleander Drive and west of Greenville Loop Road. This map provides context and highlights the site location. The site is located southwest of the signalized intersection of Oleander and Greenville Loop Roads. To the right of the slide are images of the subject site's existing conditions. This slide illustrates the existing conditions from adjacent roadways. Left of the slide are images looking east and west on Oleander Drive. To the right of the slide are images looking north and south on Greenville Loop Road. This slide illustrates the existing development pattern within the vicinity. Southwest of the site at the intersection of Bagley Avenue and Oleander Drive is the city's fire station. A variety of offices are located north of the site across Oleander Drive. A residential development is located south of the site along Richard Bradley Drive. Single-family dwellings are located east of the site across Greenville Loop Road. Retail with fuel pumps are located northeast of the site at the signalized intersection. The request before you this evening is to rezone the subject site from Community Business Conditional District to Office and Institutional Conditional District for a mixed-use development. The development would consist of 192 residential units and 20,700 square feet of office or commercial space. Non-residential uses would be limited to general business services, banks and financial institutions, restaurants, general retail, offices, and general personal services. The project includes 2 5-story, 60-foot tall buildings outlined in red on your screen with frontage along Oleander Drive, and a 45-foot 1-story building with frontage along Greenville Loop Road outlined in purple on your screen, adjacent to the residential development to the south. Access would be provided to the site in 2 locations. The first driveway would be located off of Greenville Loop Road at the intersection with Richard Bradley Drive. This access would allow for full access movements. A second access is proposed off of Oleander Drive and would be limited to right-in and right-out movements. The elevations provided by the applicant are shown on your screen. The top right image is a visual from Oleander Drive and Greenville Loop Road. The bottom left image is an internal schematic. The Create Wilmington Comprehensive Plan identifies this site as within a greenfield site mixed-use place area of opportunity and located along a high-capacity transit route. The proposal results in the increase of residential units, including 20 workforce housing units, and locates services in close proximity to existing and future residents, supporting the comprehensive plan's call for development to occur in a compact pattern that reinforces the efficient provision of public services and utilities, preserves open space, and reduces the negative impact of low-intensity and non-contiguous development patterns. Based on the information contained in the case summary and the Create Wilmington Comprehensive Plan, staff believes the request is reasonable and in the public interest and recommends conditional approval with the conditions outlined in the case summary. This concludes staff's presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. We also have the city's traffic engineer and representation from the WMPO should you have more complex traffic questions.
Any questions for staff? Commissioner Pollack?
Nicole, couple questions. Amy, can you hear me okay? And it's a semantics question. It says from community business, conditional district, and I understand how that got there, and it says to office and institutional for a mixed use. So does residential fall into that definition of mixed use?
Yes, sir. So the proposal before you this evening has a residential component that is new to this site. They are requesting incorporation of 192 residential units in addition to 20,700 square feet of non-residential.
And I got that. My question was, it says office and institutional, and it doesn't say office and institutional and residential. So does the further language that says for a mixed use just imply residential as part of that?
The applicant is utilizing a commercial mixed-use development tool to achieve the mixed-use development within the office and institutional district.
Okay. All right. And you said somebody was here to talk about, from the city, to talk about traffic as well?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so I do have a traffic question if that person's available.
Sure, come on up.
Good evening, Dennis Vacanowitz, City Traffic Engineer.
Hey, Dennis, how are you?
Good.
Just real quick, I mean, and we always get the estimated trip generations, okay? And it always says, you know, I'll say in the current zoning, it would be an average of 2,120 average two-day trip. It says in the proposed, it would be 2,440. But in reality, the net difference is really not 320. The net difference is 2,440 because you're going from zero to something new. Do I read that correctly?
Do we have that document available? I'm not.
Sure, it's the table that's in, Brian, it's page 20 of our package.
You're comparing the original proposal to the new proposal?
Well, what I'm comparing to the fact is whether you do by right or by, proposed zoning, you're starting from zero. Because there's nothing there today and the development's going to generate something.
I would agree with that,
Okay,
yes.
that's the only point I wanted to.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's the only point I wanted to make. So I just want to make sure I was interpreting
Sure.
data correctly. So, anything else? I think anything else right now, I'll wait for the applicant. Gotcha. But thank you.
All right, thank you.
I have, you can stay. Since you're up there, I'll go ahead and ask about the previous TIA that was done and the existing conditions that have changed since the previous TIA was done. Would they impact if we had the existing conditions, not the proposal? I understand what's happening there. Would that have any impact on the results of a new TIA if we had done one?
When you reference the existing conditions, like just general traffic has built
Right.
up over the years.
Right.
If they were to perform a new traffic impact analysis for this site, they would have to collect new data to, like you said, to update their analysis based on current data. There is currently an approved traffic impact analysis for this site that used the data at that time. So should there be a suggestion or proposal to do a new TIA for this portion of the site, then new data would be recommended to be collected.
Okay. Anybody else? Commissioner Lennon?
So the existing TIA, the scoping letter for that, it didn't assume that there was going to be no development. Is that right?
Correct, yeah. Every TIA, you take existing counts, then through the development, they decide how long it's going to take them to construct their development and put new trips on that new parcel or on that parcel. So all of those years up to occupancy or operation are considered background years. So it could be 1 year, it could be 3 years. So it takes the existing traffic and it grows it at the estimated average for that area for that number of years, compounding year over year until it gets to their full build-out year.
So that estimated average takes into account other developments not affiliated with the subject site.
It takes into account other developments that had been previously approved and not yet constructed. So if there were something in the area that we were estimating it was going to add trips, we would add those trips into the background traffic prior to adding this development's site trips. So it's all kind of meshed together so that the proposed development includes everything that has been previously proposed up until that date.
Okay.
And the most recent was January of 2015, correct? The original one was April of 2009, the update was 2015?
Correct.
So anything that was approved after 2015, anything that's changed since then would not be included in
Has not been
what we're looking
included,
at.
correct.
Okay. I think unless Commissioner Woodruff?
Sure.
Need Nicole back up again, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Ms. Smith, would you come back up to the podium, please?
It's page 2 and 3 of our packet, the executive summary, where there's a listing current zoning, proposed zoning. The current zoning, CB, but there's also a residential aspect to that. It says MD10, correct?
Phase 1 is currently developed under conditional district MD10. I think you're referencing the right-of-way of Richard Bradley Drive, maybe? That part is shown as part of the subject site in Figure 3, which is the land use and zoning map.
I don't know what, I'm looking at
He's looking at the chart on
It's a chart,
page 2 of the staff report.
Page
page
2.
2 of our,
Okay,
there
yes,
we go.
sir.
That's it. Under current zoning, I mean, I understand we got the community business, but then there's also MD10, medium density, multiple dwelling residential. I mean, that's a component of the current zoning. But there is no residential in the, I mean, there's nothing preventing residential under its current zoning. Is that correct?
That's correct. I think it's a capture of the right-of-way. Richard Bradley Drive, if you'll refer to the land use and zoning overlay map, has that MD10 designation. It is currently being used to service the residents that exist off of Richard Bradley in Phase 1.
Okay. Down at the bottom where it says residential uses and it says none, is that none are either currently there, which I know they're not, or prevented, or does it just mean none, they cannot put residential units there under its current zoning?
The 2015 rezoning of Phase 2, which is before you this evening, did not include a residential component. It was subject to a conditional district that only allowed for 62,400 square feet of non-residential.
Okay. But the applicant could come in and ask for, I don't know, I guess rezoning or additional aspect of conditional to put residential into this place, could they not under its current zoning?
They're before you this evening to add a residential component.
Okay, all right. But could they, okay, but the residential component they're doing now, if you go over to the next page under density, under that chart, it says the maximum residential density shall be 17 units per acre. That's under the current zoning. And across from that, it says under what they're asking for, now it's going to go up to 33.6 units per acre. In other words, it's potentially doubling what they could do.
So what you're referencing is Table 2, which outlines the supplemental use standards for application of the commercial district mixed use zoning tool, which would typically cap density at 17 units per acre. However, there is a caveat that the density cap is eliminated when there is a dedication of workforce housing.
Sure, I understand that. Okay. On the screen right now, what I'm looking at is just under the headline density. Okay, it's under the category of current zoning.
It's under the required CDMU. It's a
Right.
new chart. It's not like the top chart.
Okay, well, whatever. I'm just saying, under this current zoning, it's the maximum of 17 units per acre if they wanted it that way. But what they're asking for is 33.6 units per acre, correct? Yeah. So, I mean, they're.
Can I clarify one thing for you?
You can clarify it all for me.
The
it'd be great.
the current conditional community business district prohibits residential by means of condition.
Right.
That's why they're here this evening.
Right.
What they are proposing to achieve the project objectives is to utilize this commercial district mixed use.
Okay.
So what's on the screen is what they will be held to should this rezoning be approved.
All right. But what I'm saying is it would be an option, maybe they don't want it, I assume they don't, to go under the current zoning, but it would limit it to 17 units per acre, correct?
The current zoning prohibits residential uses.
They would have to start a new application for a new
Yes,
zoning.
sir.
Okay. That's an option that they could have done.
They can explore that option, yes, sir.
The one we're doing tonight is the much more dense, 33.6 per acre.
Yes, sir.
All right, you've clarified it, thank you. All right, thank you very much.
Commissioner Lennon?
First of all, thank you for schooling me today on including the plan in here. Brian, would you mind going to page 4? Keep going. Okay, so this, the one on the bottom here that says previous approved site plan 2015, what would the applicant have to do today if they wanted to build that?
They have the rights to build this project today.
So short of building permits and utility?
They would have to go through technical review and building permitting, but the entitlement exists today.
So they don't need to come talk to us or city council or anybody?
Correct. They achieved that right in 2015.
Okay. And then, Madam Chair, I do have some questions related to the site plan and traffic, but I think it's probably better after the applicant's
To the applicant.
presentation.
Okay, sounds good, thanks.
Thank you.
Commissioner Pollak?
Well, let me go back to what you just said to make sure I understand it. Current by right, and as Commissioner Lennon pointed out, figure 2, it shows the previously approved site plan. Does the by right allow them to do a 5-story building today? If we were not sitting here asking for any kind of an exception, not exception, bad choice of words, asking for a rezoning, by right, would they be able to build the height that they're asking for today in the quantity that they're asking for today?
That's a loaded question. So the conditional
sorry.
district that they have rights to today actually included a height restriction of 2 stories
Okay.
for the commercial component shown in figure 2.
Okay.
The office and institutional district that they are requesting allows them to achieve the 5-story height without a special use permit.
Okay. Yeah, and that's the clarity I just wanted to make sure was at least straight in my mind and for the benefit of the other commissioners is that, by right, here's what they can do, and then there's the ask, and then there's the request. So the 5-story would not be allowed under the current by right.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Adams?
In one of the attachments from the neighborhood meeting, there's a diagram that talks about the open space, and it listed it as Phase 2. I guess I'm curious, if I study the 2 site plans for the Phase 2 that's close to Oleander, my question, this might be more technical related, the stormwater and the open space requirements for the original, I guess I'll call it Phase 1 and Phase 2, does that change based on a new proposed site plan for this Phase 2? Or does what's built in place or exists today as stormwater and open space requirement also satisfy what would be needed for this different Phase 2?
I'd like to separate the 2, if that's okay. They will be required to add additional treatment and capacity from a stormwater perspective to accommodate Phase 2 development. The open space is a little different. There is a provision under the same commercial district mixed-use application that allows for the open space calculation to be accounted for across the entire Phase 1 and Phase 2 development.
Okay, thanks.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair.
Commissioner
Nicole,
Gopher.
will you repeat that last statement? I couldn't quite hear you.
So there is an open space is addressed through the commercial district mixed-use zoning tool, which allows them to achieve this proposal that allows them to calculate open space across both Phase 1 and Phase 2. It is viewed as a cohesive development, so they can take advantage of the open space that exists and was provided as Phase 1 to accommodate Phase 2.
Thank you.
All right, I think we've finished with you for now. Sorry, Commissioner
That was-
Kofer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's probably not it for me. I'm always a little long-winded. Ms. Smith, there's three topics I'd like to talk about. One is open space. So we just hinted on that, so we'll start there. The second would be height, and the third would be traffic improvements or road improvements, for lack of a better term. So open space, on our chart, on our packet on page 3, Brian, the bottom two columns, the applicant is providing 42% open space throughout the cohesive development. They're required to provide 20%. So you're saying now, for all of our understanding, that 42% is achieved through Phase 1 and Phase 2, not just this Phase 2 site?
That's correct. And I actually have an exhibit of the open space dedication in my PowerPoint. If we can pull that up, that might help answer some of your questions as to what they're calculating to achieve the open space. I'm a visual person, so I feel like this might help alleviate some of that questioning that you have on how they're able to provide the 42% that they're claiming in their application.
Okay, that definitely brings up some questions. So south of the site, south of even the town homes at Summerwalk, this green area, these are the credits being applied to the Phase 2 site?
Everything outlined in green is the open space that they are saying allows them to build Phase 1 and Phase 2.
Okay, thank you. Okay, fair enough. So that's the open space question. Thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
The second question I would have is height. As you know, I'm quite new to the board, so this is the first time I've seen the CDMU put into play. And my understanding is that when we take the CDMU, we combine the O and I, add this component, then height becomes in the table optional up to 96 feet. Does that
I think
sound
I have
about
another
right?
slide that might help with
It's
this.
based on a stepped back ratio.
That's correct.
I'm not following what that step back ratio is.
I have a visual on the screen that may help or
Okay,
confuse you.
let's
I'm
do
not
that.
sure
Let's visualize that one too.
which. But this is kind of a demonstration on how that step back is applied to achieve the 96.
Is that being applied in this site? Do we know? Or
There will be a setback expectation since they are exceeding the 45 feet as showed in your table, but they are not seeking the full 96 feet. They are capping it at 60 feet.
okay. And just for clarification purposes, to make sure I'm on the same page and same sheet of music as everyone else, what they can do by right was conditioned through some similar process that we do here. So there is no residential component. By right, they can do the two-story, what we saw on the site plan that Commissioner Adams referenced, or Commissioner Lennon. That's correct?
There is currently a site-specific plan that has been approved through this process that is limiting the potential redevelopment of Phase 1, and that is the Commercial Business Conditional District. Through that process, there was a height restriction capping future development at 2 stories.
Okay, so we didn't have a linear footage. We just had a two-story previous.
Right.
Thank you so much, Ms. Smith. Again, and my last question would be, we've covered open space height, and would be the vehicular ingress, egress, and improvements, and I don't know if that's Mr. Dennis.
Yes,
His
I will
department.
defer to the expert on that question. Thank you.
Welcome
Yes, sir.
back.
Good evening, sir. So in our packet, we have an itemized list of improvements that accompanied Phase 1 and will be required should they build Phase 2 that they're approved for.
Sure.
So my questions are, and some of this may be for the applicant that they can address, but do you know, I mean, did this particular developer fund those improvements that we see today
Yes.
solely, not in a public-private partnership? That developer took care of those?
As a requirement of the development itself and the traffic that it's going to generate, the developer finance the roadway improvements.
Okay. And I can see there's a lot more improvements that would be required. It's difficult to visualize what those are in writing. One question I have, though, is I'm a layperson when it comes to this stuff, so if it's a dumb question, just tell me. But when you're on Oleander and you're headed, northeast towards Bradley Creek, all those folks that want to turn right into the subject property, is there any potential or merit to like an off-ramp right there?
I think one of the requirements of the Phase 2, which is the parcel we're talking about today, is a right turn lane from Oleander onto Greenville Loop Road. That would also, there is also, prior to arriving at Greenville Loop Road, there will be an entry point to the development directly onto Oleander. So a driver that's traveling east on Oleander could, one, turn right into this new driveway that is not there today, or continue to Greenville Loop Road, enter a right turn lane, and turn right onto Greenville Loop Road.
Okay, so would this particular property owner be forfeiting some of their private property for that lane, or I don't know, I can't visualize how that works with the Exxon.
It depends on how much right-of-way is out there. It may be a better question for the applicant. They may have more information on that.
Well, that's pleasing to know, at least traveling east. And so the proposal is no vehicular ingress heading west on Oleander, taking a left into this site.
Correct.
Okay, good, because that's a pretty dangerous turn. All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
That's it, Madam Chair, for me.
Commissioner Lennon, is this for?
Other than the gravel and dirt apron that's right at the corner by the Exxon station when you turn right onto Greenville Loop Road, is there a turning lane there currently?
No, there's not.
Okay, thanks.
I wanted to have one last question for you to follow up on some of the others. The email string that was included as an attachment in our packet indicates there might be some unresolved issues with who pays for the improvements. Has anything happened since then that would move the ball closer to resolution, or is that still kind of hanging out there?
I think the information that I received recently was that the timing between the multi-party kind of agreement to do the improvements, it wasn't going to line up appropriately for all parties. So I believe the applicant may have more information than I at this point, but my understanding is that the timing for NCDOT, the city, and the developers, all those projects coming together at once, that the time frame was not going to line up.
Okay. Commissioner Adams?
The improvements we're looking at on the screen for the Phase 2, that was based on the original conditional district TIA findings from the 2015 plan, is that correct?
That's correct.
And the new proposal was roughly 360 additional trips with the new plan, I think, that's being proposed?
I would have to refer to the chart.
320. I mean, I guess I'm trying to figure out what level of opinion based on a different program now for that site. I mean, there is a net difference in trips, but not all trips are equally impactful, right? So how much does the change of use with much more residential in your mind affect the type of trips as opposed to just the quantity or number of 320?
I think the biggest change, in my opinion, from the original to the proposed is that residential generates a lot of AM peak hour and PM peak hour. It generates more AM peak hour trips than commercial does. When you think about a business, it's not generally open at 7 o'clock in the morning when a lot of people leave. So that shift in the number of trips is due to that land use shift. But spread out over the course of the day, you know, we're talking about peak hours here, average weekday two-way volumes of 320 vehicles per day.
Okay, thanks.
All right.
Thank
Thank you, Mr. Dennis. All right, and the applicant is here with the presentation?
Good
Let's
evening,
be-
Madam
good
Chair,
evening.
members of the board, commissioners. My name's Sam Frank. I represent the applicant. Before I delve into my presentation, I'd like to say a couple things responsive to the questions that you were just discussing that I hope will be helpful. First of all, the open space on this total development was always intended to serve both phases 1 and 2, and it's a cohesive and complete development. The current design that's approved satisfies the open space requirements. The proposed design satisfies those requirements as well. The current design that is proposed satisfies the setback requirements. We've worked with staff to make sure that that is the case. Land for the public right-of-way improvements on Oleander in connection with this development will need to be dedicated by this property owner. There's also land that will need to be acquired by the DOT presumably for additional aspects of that right-of-way improvement. But a critical component of it is that the landowner will dedicate some of its land. And finally, I'd note that there is a NCDOT approved STIP for all of these improvements that are contemplated in the TIA. I introduced myself. With me this evening are Howard Penton, who is a representative of the owner of the property and the applicant, and also our traffic engineer, Don Bennett. The site location, as identified by Ms. Smith, here at the corner of Greenville Loop and Oleander Drive. Ideal location based on practical consideration and also the city's future land use desires reflected in the policy documents for exactly this type of development. This is a commercial mixed-use development that incorporates workforce housing. Proposed rezoning is directly in line with the desired future development contemplated by the city in its policy documents, which were updated in 2016. This is phase 2 of a multi-phase development. The first phase of the development incorporated townhomes and single-family homes. Second phase of the development has always been contemplated as some sort of mixed use. The current approval, the current zoning approval is from 2015. A lot of things have changed since 2015. The city's comp plan has been updated. We've been through a pandemic, and to put it succinctly, the demand for office space is nowhere close to what it used to be. We do have an increased and meaningful demand for a greater diversity of housing options, housing that is more organically affordable, and workforce specified housing. Therefore, the developer has proposed an evolution to the design 9 years later that fits both the needs of the city and the site in a more appropriate fashion than the current zoning approval. As you can see, the new design incorporates a structured parking below, buildings that are designed to interact with one another effectively, an attractive and appealing entry and corridor off of Oleander Drive that incorporates appropriate, useful commercial uses that will serve as an amenity to the community and also to the development itself. The use of taller buildings allows us to incorporate structured parking, which has a couple of benefits. Most significantly, it reduces the amount of surface parking. That also makes for a more attractive site as well as a more efficient use of the land. Through discussions with staff and with members of the community, we incorporated several changes to this design over the last 6 months. One of the most significant is to reduce the height of the buildings that are immediately adjacent to the townhomes in phase 1 of the of the Summer Walk development. So the tallest structures that are proposed here, as you can see, are oriented along Oleander Drive, and the lower height buildings are located more closely to the existing townhomes. Proposed uses versus by right uses. I think that Ms. Smith covered this well, and so unless you have any questions for me, I won't belabor that point. The most significant impact on the commercial uses beyond residential, commercial uses that were previously permitted that will not be permitted in the future is a microbrewery. Let's see. You had some discussion earlier about why the zoning change, why go from CB to O&I. As you can see, O&I is really a better fit. The land to the north, the land to the west, the land to the east are all zoned O&I already. When you do a CDMU and you incorporate workforce housing, the density cap is the same, regardless of whether it's a conditional CB or a conditional O&I zone. In this case, we thought that the O&I was a more appropriate and a better fit for this location. Ms. Smith also explained in good detail why this project is absolutely consistent with both the comprehensive plan and the future land use plan. There are several express policies that identify the benefit of exactly this type of development where we have existing infrastructure in place. In addition to the comments that Ms. Smith made, I'd also note that this is expressly identified on the growth strategies map as an area intended for higher intensity and mixed use. Of course, that's exactly what we've proposed here. Of the proposed conditions, there are a couple that I want to specifically call out and identify. First, this project is expressly designed to incorporate a component of workforce housing. City adapted the code a little while ago to encourage developers to do just that. This landowner saw that, understands it, sees the value in it, and has incorporated that into the proposal. Total number of multifamily residents is capped expressly at 192. And the use for the commercial areas is limited to general business services, banks, restaurant, general retail, offices, and general personal services. There are a couple of recommended conditions from staff that we propose revisions to. I've discussed this with staff. Those conversations came after the publication of the staff report, and so I'm showing those to you here. The first is just a clarification in condition 5. It was not staff's intent to omit the possibility of residential use. Of course, that's a core and important component of this. And so the red language there clarifies that the limit on commercial uses is only intended for the commercial areas of the project. The second change is with regard to parking. So in this total development, there's no intention to establish express limitations on parking in any fashion except for the parking that's under the buildings. But today, a portion of the Phase 2 land is utilized as overflow parking for residents in the Phase 1 land, about 12 spaces or so. And so instead of this concept of an agreement to agree, which frankly is a carryover condition from an old approval, we are suggesting that we have an express condition that at least 20 of the parking spaces in the Phase 2 of the development will be expressly made available for all of the residents in the Summer Walk development. I'd like to talk about traffic for a minute. I know that's going to be a meaningful topic of conversation for you this evening, and I want to share some thoughts about that on the front end. Oleander Drive, Greenville Loop, Greenville Ave are NCDOT and City of Wilmington roads. Two of those roads in the intersection of Greenville Loop and Oleander are significantly overburdened. They don't work well. That intersection today is crowded. It is particularly difficult to navigate in the afternoons, and particularly difficult in the afternoons if you're trying to turn left off of Oleander and onto Greenville Loop. As a landowner who depends on those public roads, this applicant is greatly looking forward to the NCDOT and the City of Wilmington doing what they need to do to improve that intersection and those roads. The decision for you today is not whether this landowner should be denied the opportunity to improve his land because other citizens overburdened the road before he had a chance to build on it. The question for you today is this proposed change in the zoning have any impact on that traffic burden that influences your decision? Now, I respect the trip generation table that staff prepared and delivered to you, recognize and understand where it came from. Our traffic engineer, we asked our traffic engineer to do the same analysis. And as we've represented to the members of the community in the community meetings, our understanding is that the trip generation based on the new is actually less than the trip generation based on the existing. These are pretty subtle distinctions either way. We're not talking about a lot of peak hour trips in any of those circumstances. And what's most important to me is that the PM peak hour trips, whether you look at the analysis as done by our engineer or the analysis as done by the city staff, both reflect a reduction in the afternoon peak hour trips. So that particularly difficult time for that intersection is improved by this proposed change in zoning. So what I'm showing you here is the analysis performed by our engineer. Table on the bottom left shows you the proposed. Table on the bottom right shows you the existing. Important to note that these are for the total development. So where staff showed you the numbers for just phase 2, based on their analysis, we're showing you the total impact of the total development. Again, this is a multi-phase development, and so it makes sense to us to evaluate the numbers in that fashion. As our engineer has calculated it, you have a reduction in AM trips of 32 peak hour trips. So that's a reduction in about 1 car per every 2 minutes. You have a reduction in the PM trips of 135. That's about 2 cars per minute. And over the course of the entire day, you have a reduction of about 270 trips. Those numbers sound relatively big, but in the scheme of the volume of traffic on Greenville Loop Road and on Oleander Drive, they're not. They're not huge bumps one way or the other, which is why I described the overall traffic impact as relatively subtle. As previously mentioned, this proposed mixed-use development is absolutely consistent with the city's comprehensive plan and the growth strategies map. The fundamental and most important question before you is whether or not this proposed change to the zoning is consistent with the city's future wishes as demonstrated by those policies. Those policies establish the marker by which landowners and developers are supposed to make their plans for future development. This developer has done just that. Accordingly, we respectfully request that this board recommend approval of the proposed rezoning as described in this package. I would appreciate the opportunity to answer any questions you have, and also respectfully ask for the opportunity to speak with you again after you hear any comments that other citizens in the room care to offer.
Thank you, Mr. Frank. Do we have a timekeeper? How long was that presentation? Okay. So that will add 7 minutes to the public hearing in opposition, since we had a little extra time for the applicant presentation.
Understood, and thank you for being so graceful and allowing me to speak. I appreciate that.
Feeling generous tonight, I guess. Thank you for the presentation. Any questions for the applicant? Commissioner Adams?
Sam, you talked about differences of, I guess, TIA. The staff's required improvements, are you or is the applicant in agreement with being okay with those with the modified conditional rezoning?
So the recommended improvements from the TIA are what they are. There's no change to those recommended improvements in connection with this proposed rezoning.
And just to be, I run into this a lot because people ask, what's the chicken and the egg with TIA? or with off-site improvements. And this project would be one where I think, like other projects, in order to receive a certificate of occupancy or completion for the project, most of the time, the off-street or off-site improvements have to be completed prior to that. Is that correct?
That is the way that the condition number 6 reads.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Absolutely.
Commissioner Lennon?
So I think this was Exhibit 6.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so just so I'm clear, so this map reflects the improvements required in the TIA for the collective project?
This map reflects the subject site and our proposed changes to the use of the subject site. I'm not sure that it does reflect all of the TIA contemplated improvements. I would need to rely on preferably the city's traffic engineer to demonstrate those to you. It was not our intention with this exhibit to show all of them. This exhibit does contemplate the TIA-based traffic improvements that will be on the applicant's property and improvements that the applicant, of course, is willing to make to the public right-of-way that are on the applicant's property.
And I'm assuming you've seen our packet, listed within the packet as well, too, which came straight from the TIA.
I have seen the packet, and I am familiar with the list of improvements described for Phase 2 to be completed prior to CO for Phase 2. But the distinction I'm drawing here is the applicant knows that it will be responsible for those improvements that are on its own land. We also know that the NCDOT has approved the project to fund, to build the significant improvements to the state's and the city's property. I think that there may be a discussion in the future about whether there's any other private contributions by the landowner in addition to the improvements on its own property. And so I'm just trying to be candid and forthright that it's not the applicant's intention that it will personally fund all of the improvements that are reflected in the TIA at the end of the day.
Okay, but it is the applicant's intention that item number 6, the condition number 6, that all of those improvements will be done prior to the issuance of a CO.
We understand that that's what that condition describes. Yes, sir.
Okay. I just want to make sure other people do too. That's why I'm being redundant. So, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lennon. Commissioner Pollack?
Mr. Frank, welcome. Nice to see you again.
Good to see you as well, sir.
My answer to that is always great to be seen, so that's always a plus. I have several topics. Traffic, I think we're pretty much exhausting that it's an issue. But I just, again, want to make the point in the same question I made to Ms. Smith earlier, is that when you look at these different TIA tables and all that, would you agree with me that whether it's, down 32 or whatever, the starting point is 0. We're talking about adding significant volumes of traffic to Oleander and or Greenville Loop by the construction of this, because there's nothing coming out of that section today.
Well, what I would say in response to that, sir, is that we're not here to ask you whether or not we can build something on the property.
Understand.
Already have the right to build something on the property. Mm-hmm. We're here to encourage you to change the entitlement in a way that will positively, in my opinion, impact the number of trips that go on to Greenville Loop and Oleander.
Okay, I'll live with that for now. Can we go back, Brian or Sam, I don't know who's controlling.
I can.
Go back to the chart where you had the actual physical buildings.
Yeah. There's a couple renderings. There's one view from each direction. Tell me if I get to the one.
Keep going back. Going.
It's just a little slow to respond.
I understand.
Bear with me.
Understand. There you go. This'll do. Yeah, that's the
You prefer this one? Okay.
Yeah, that's good.
Yes, sir.
So, we're talking about 5-story versus by right 2. You're asking for permission to go 60 feet. So,
Yeah, about half of it's 5 stories, about half of it's 4 stories.
I got it, okay. Any thought to how you might address any concerns from current residents in Phase 1, that all of a sudden they have buildings that are taller, or they might consider to be significantly taller than what they're living in, you know, looking down on their property? Because I noticed in this rendering, basically there's no tree buffer. Okay, any thoughts on that?
A couple, yeah. First, that is one of the most significant things that we adapted about this plan in response to the things that we heard from our neighbors. We reduced the height of those buildings that are adjacent to the townhomes from 5 stories to 4 stories to ease that transition and make it a little bit more of a transition between the tall buildings along Oleander and the existing townhome structures. And the second thing that I offer in response to that is that height is not the enemy. When we talk about wanting mixed use, and we talk about wanting a greater diversity of housing options, and we talk about wanting to incorporate workforce housing and the desirability of structured parking underneath the buildings, we're necessarily describing a scenario that promotes height, encourages height as a component of good design. And so those are the two things I would say in response.
Okay, do you envision, since this is a Phase 2, am I correct in assuming that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, do you, I'm assuming there's an HOA in place in Phase 1. Is the assumption that that HOA would then take over governance of Phase 2, or are you talking about two separate, do you envision two separate HOAs?
There are actually 2 homeowners associations today. There's a single-family home subcommunity and a townhome subcommunity. There's also an existing master plan community. The Phase 2 property will be subject to that master plan community. And there are several amenities and aspects of the total development that are managed by that master plan community association. I can go into more detail about that if you want, but I don't think you do. I think you're just asking me for the general.
I'm just trying to understand the governance of the property.
Sure, understood.
Once it's developed, you know, either by right or if the proposal's adopted. We're talking about, in this proposed Phase 2 and the proposed rezoning that we're talking about making certain commitments to do this, you know, developer will work with, you know, the city, et cetera, et cetera. Are there any unfulfilled kinds of those agreements, either implied or contractual, that still exist with Phase 1 that would impede your ability to, you know, make those kinds of commitments for Phase 2? You know, road improvements, you know,
Yeah. I'm not aware of any failure to comply with existing zoning conditions. I'm not aware of any notices of violation to indicate that there's been some failure to comply with existing zoning conditions. But then again, you know, my knowledge is limited on that. We could perhaps ask staff the same question and get their insight on that.
It's not zoning that I'm referring to. It's when, you know, people buy into a community and it's developed and they buy in and they either make assumptions or in a presentation or contractually there are commitments by the developer to do A, B, C, D, E, E, F, G, whatever.
Yes.
And my question is are there any of those kinds of things remaining open that would hinder your ability to further develop Phase 2? And or how do you propose to make sure that if there are commitments you're making, that they are in place for that, you know, the 192 units? If I bought one there tomorrow, how would I be sure that those commitments will be lived up to and honored? I'm not trying to be obtuse. I really am trying to phrase this so that it makes sense. So if I'm not, let me know. I'll keep trying.
And in the context of a zoning consideration, it's a difficult question for me to answer. What I know, what it feels like you're asking me to do is one, acknowledge, of course, I read the same comments that you did. We've been interacting with and working with members of those homeowners associations for, gosh, almost 9 months now. There are certainly things that some of the owners in Summerwalk Phase 1 believe that they are owed by the developer. There are certainly disagreements between the developer and some of the owners in Phase 1. I am not in any sort of position to adjudicate that or tell you who's right and who's wrong. I acknowledge that there are potential civil disputes, although I'm not aware of any lawsuits that have been filed. And I also don't know how that impacts the ultimate zoning decision here.
And that's a fair point, Sam. It is.
Okay.
I realize I'm kind of on the ragged edge of what's really a zoning question, but I'm just, as I read through, this is a somewhat complex package, and these are the things that, as I went through this over the last couple of days, that what about this and what about that? Final question I'll ask you is about drainage.
Yeah.
I mean, talk to me about the stormwater plan. How's that? I mean, as I understand it, when I was out at the property the other day, there's a pond or something on that existing, on the plot that we're talking about, that when it rains, it overflows onto Greenville Loop. How are we going to address that?
Sure. So today, most of the site is not improved, not graded, not engineered. There are at least one and maybe two existing ponds on the site, and they are, one of those is incorporated into and part of a stormwater management system. That will change several things will change in connection with the development of the second phase. We haven't engineered it in full, of course. At this point, we're still at the entitlement phase, but we have gotten far enough with the engineering to know that it will be in-ground infiltration. You can see just by looking at the site plan that there's no ponds on it. And so the intent, the conceptual design for that engineering is to incorporate in-ground infiltration systems, which is a very well-established and settled and even in many cases preferable, albeit more expensive, way to manage stormwater. Once the site is engineered, designed, and built in accordance with the stormwater regulations, the stormwater that is on site will be treated on site and dispersed from the stormwater system in a slow, clean fashion, as is the design of those systems. Whereas today, the water runs with the natural lay of the land, and the drainage is whatever Mother Nature intended it to be.
I lied. I really have one more question.
No, you're fine.
It's on traffic. And my apology to my fellow commissioners. You alluded in your presentation to, I believe Oleander is considered a state road.
It's my understanding, yes, sir.
Okay, so I sat through a presentation at a different function about 2 months ago where the Department of Transportation laid out, their projects approved and proposed for the next 10, 15 years, ranging from the proposals at Eastwood and Military Cutoff all the way to over on Market and a whole bit. I didn't find, nor did they present, anything relative to Oleander. So is there you referenced some study, if you could, provide us with what it is you're seeing that implies that maybe there's something in the works in the near term.
I'm going to give you the layman's answer, and then I'm going to ask that one of the engineers provide
fair.
a more specific one. My understanding is that the STIP that contemplates these improvements was approved just a month or 6 weeks ago.
Okay.
And so the presentation that you saw, perhaps prior to that date, may not have included those improvements. Now, that said, with your consent, I'd like to ask either the WMPO representative or our engineer, either one, to answer your question more specifically about the identification of that STIP and when it was approved.
That's fair, and that's what I was, you're absolutely correct. And what I saw could be outdated relative, and I just want to understand what you're referring to.
We're bird dogging that. As I mentioned earlier, this landowner is very interested to see the state fund and get that project done.
Yeah. Okay, that's all I have for. Okay.
We'll keep it brief. It's a little bit outside of our jurisdiction for tonight, but if you wanted to bring your engineer up to respond to the question, that's fine.
Sure. Do you prefer to hear from ours or from yours?
Probably, I guess ours.
Okay.
We got
Very good.
all kinds of
Yeah.
resources in the room.
Good evening, Commissioners. Scott James for the WMPO. My understanding, and this was discussed also earlier today, is that the intersection safety improvements that are being referenced have been funded with a right-of-way year of 2027 and a proposed construction year of 2029. So there is a commitment, and those are the dates that have now been made public.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Lennon?
Mr. Frank, can you go back to the slide where you referenced the LDC and some of the things that the code called for in terms of housing? And it had four columns with descriptors on it.
Yes, sir, from the comp plan.
Yep.
Yeah. Bear with me, I'm clicking faster than it's moving.
While you're looking for it, were you involved in the rezoning of Phase 1?
I was not.
You were not. Do you know what year that happened?
2015 is.
No, Phase 1. where
Got
they
it.
built. Yeah.
Let me, so I don't answer the question wrong, let me rely on Ms. Smith, who I think knows that. The original zoning.
2010, a birdie just whispered in my ear.
I beg your pardon?
2010.
Okay, so
Okay.
the total was perhaps 2010, Phase 2 was rezoned in 2015 to its current.
Okay, so, and thank you, Commissioner Woodruff, but.
Thank
So
you,
in
Commissioner Woodruff.
2010, yeah, in 2010, all of that land, I say all, I'm referring to Phase 1 specifically now, was zoned R15.
Okay,
Okay. And then it was rezoned to, don't want to mess this up. What was it rezoned to?
we believe it was MFL,
MFL. Okay.
conditional.
That's correct. So the zoning history for this particular proposal, in January 2010, City Council approved a request to rezone 5.82 acres of the site to office and institutional conditional district for the construction of 2 professional office buildings totaling not more than 80,000 square feet. The remaining 20.43 acres were rezoned to MFL Conditional District for the development of 140 dwelling units, consisting of a mix of attached townhomes and single-family homes.
Okay, so keeping in mind, we went from R15 zoning to an extremely dense zoning on that 20 acres that was just mentioned. Where in your mind in these columns is that consistent? I'm trying to draw a similarity between what happened then and today.
Okay, and these are 2016 forward objectives stated in the comp plan. I don't know what the comp plan policies were in 2010, but multiple of these policies would apply to that scenario as well if we were looking at it again today. Creating a place for everyone, getting around, changing places, revitalizing spaces, all are consistent with the idea of incorporating a diversity of housing options, building greater density in a place where infrastructure already exists, which is what would have happened in 2010.
So I happen to live off Greenville Loop Road. Do you recall, were there any other townhome projects anywhere on Greenville Loop Road at the time?
In 2010, sir? Mm-hmm. I know that, not because I worked on them, but just from driving down that way, that there have been some since, but I don't know the timing.
Okay. So the product that your client's requesting approval for is based on, let's tie that to these items in the plan.
Absolutely.
So, I mean,
Yep. So the residential options that are available in the Summer Walk total development today include single-family homes and townhomes. The residential options that will be incorporated with the development of this project include multifamily apartments, some one-bedroom, some two-bedroom. We believe that that creates a nice spectrum and breadth of diversity of housing options, and that's exactly what creating a place for everyone is all about. We also recognize that that incorporates a greater number of homes that will be adjacent to existing commercial services and some new commercial services. The whole objective with urban planning and mixed use is build the homes in close proximity to the offices, restaurants, and stores, and people don't have to drive nearly as far on the roads to get from one place to another. And this proposal, as well as the prior one, work in the positive direction to achieve just that.
Thank you.
Commissioner Woodruff?
Sam, just as a brief summary for me, since the first zoning, well, prior was R15, we know that's just archaic back then, whatever.
Right.
But phase one was residential, and the small part phase two was going to be commercial from the beginning, correct? The second time it came up, residential stayed the same, but the commercial had some modifications to it, but it still stayed commercial. So until this came up, that phase two has always been commercial. Am I right?
Yes, sir. It was O&I conditional commercial without a mixed-use component first.
Right.
Then it was CB mixed use without a commercial residential component second. And then we're 8 years later, and things have changed.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've had an earful, and I read half my afternoon reading the issues from the near residents that, you know, there was promises made, and I understand how that goes. But I'm sympathetic to them looking at history on paper. It was commercial, and then all of a sudden, it's gone residential. And can you say it's anything else than high-density residential that's going into phase two?
Yes. Are you asking about what commercial components are included in phase two?
No. I'm just asking, now putting residential into phase two, first time. In my simple terms, I'm calling it high density. Could it be any more dense than what is proposed?
It could. I think the cap, if you incorporate workforce housing, is 35 units. Is that right?
There's no cap.
Yeah, there's no cap.
The use of the commercial district mixed use eliminates the density cap altogether. The 36 units per acre that you're referencing is if you're dedicating workforce housing in a multiple dwelling district.
Got it. Thank you.
Do you know
Forgive me for getting that wrong.
Do you know what the cap is, or if you did not propose the workforce aspect?
17 units an acre.
Okay. So the workforce aspect allows you to virtually double density by math.
Yes, sir. It's my understanding that that's exactly what the policy is intended to achieve.
I understand. Thank you.
Any other questions, Commissioner Gopher?
Oh, me, sorry to belabor this, but it is a very, as Commissioner Pollock mentioned, a very complex project and a very, unique site. And of course, our job, as you very well know, is to be duty-bound to the citizens of Wilmington, not just the ones that are in this room, not just the applicant, but all those that are not heard tonight. So forgive us for taking this much time, but I think it's worthy and deserves the merit. Mr. Frank, I guess the questions I have are very similar to what I asked Ms. Smith from the beginning. We're going to start with two easy ones that I didn't address Nicole with, but someone mentioned the number of units in Summerwalk. Was that 140? Did I hear that?
It's 119.
119 current townhomes.
That's a combination of
detached
townhomes and single
and
family. Yep.
And you have used an acronym several times tonight. Forgive me, I don't know what it means, but STIP.
Oh, boy. May I invite the engineer again to answer so I don't make a mistake?
Absolutely.
Just a generic, what does it generically mean? I don't need the exact the letters corresponding with the words. Just what is a STIP in general terms? What are we talking about?
Transportation Improvement Project, I believe.
Good evening, Don Bennett, Davenport Engineering. The State Transportation Improvement Program, or project, it's how the state looks at the demands on their transportation system and programs out improvements and projects to systematically address those congestion concerns.
Fantastic, thank you.
Thank you.
Forgive my naivety.
No, apparently I share it. Thank you for asking.
Transitioning from that, we've used the word traffic a few times, but I'm not sure traffic's the right nomenclature because it's more or less transportation engineering, transportation systems, ingress, egress, safety, vehicular ingress, egress, travel times, things of that nature. it's difficult for me personally, I can't speak for the rest of this board, but to not have a visual of the STIP, of the developers' private contributions, when you mentioned they're going to dedicate some property, how the Exxon comes into this. I mean, I just cannot look at these words and see that. That's not a question, I'll just make that a comment.
Okay.
One question, though, when it comes to, placemaking based on the comp plan, what we're trying to achieve as a city. I grew up on Greenville Loop Road, so this may be silly, but is there any possibility of a crosswalk across Greenville Loop to get these 119 Summerwalk residents and these proposed new units across towards, Boathouse Restaurant, towards that side of the street?
So, thank you for pulling this up. This is a graphic depiction of, I believe, the improvements that are contemplated in the STIP. And as you can see, that absolutely incorporates some pedestrian crossings and some sidewalks, and incorporates a pedestrian crossing across the mouth of or the top of Greenville Loop Road that would get you from the gas station adjacent to the subject site, coming up, but you can come up the sidewalk from it, and get across that road safely to the boathouse area that you're describing.
Thank you. I think this is the first time I've actually seen this slide.
I would also say in a broader sense that the ultimate decision about what improvements need to be made to the public roads, based on the traffic that's currently using the public roads, the other proposed developments in this area, this proposed development, and the like, is beyond the scope of the expertise of this applicant. We all the citizens of Wilmington, rely on the WMPO cooperating with the NCDOT to answer those details, to figure out exactly what needs to be done and how it needs to be done. And in this case, we reached out to the WMPO on the front end and said, we need to revitalize that analysis. You got an analysis from 2014, I think it was updated in 2000, well, updated subsequently, but not within the last couple of years. And the answer was no. We understand what we need to understand with regard to our plans to improve this intersection. And my interpretation from that was there's nothing about what you're doing to change the zoning here that's going to have any impact on the improvements that need to be made, the improvements that we've already decided that need to be made. We relied on that answer. We didn't do a new TIA, and continue to rely on that answer today and rely on the WMPO to guide all of us as to determine what are the right improvements to be made to this intersection.
Fair enough, well said. Number two on my initial questions with Ms. Smith was height.
Yep.
I think you had mentioned height is not the enemy. I agree, height is not the enemy. Where we live in a place that's surrounded by water on three sides, at some point vertical integration is likely our path forward. The trouble I'm seeing here with 60 feet is it doesn't necessarily line up with the transition and the fabric of this particular site. I will applaud the applicant, the design for the urban solution of parking under the building, but it seems to me like, it will be the tallest building, I don't know, in a pretty good radius right there. So that's definitely a concern, shadowing, towering over the other existing townhomes, towering over the fire station. Just speaking out loud, as always here.
So it'll be the tallest building the day it's built.
The day it's built.
Within proximity of that intersection. But if we, the citizens, continue to follow the policy guidelines and the direction that the city has provided for what it wants for the future development of Wilmington, it won't be the tallest building within striking distance for long.
Fair enough.
To follow up on that real quick before you finish
Go for it.
and move on, would you confirm that all the townhouses that are adjacent are 3 stories? And so the buildings you've brought down from 5 to 4 would just be a transition of an extra story?
Yeah, and that's, you understand the philosophy and intent. You know, you go from 3 stories to 4 stories to 5 stories as you get closer to Oleander Drive in a sloped and transition fashion.
Thanks. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My last comment or question would be the open space requirement. Now that we've seen exactly where the open space exists, we also received several public comments before this meeting. Would the applicant have any concern with a condition being to improve that open space for all of the residents of Summerwalk and Phase 2?
Not at all, it's already in there.
It's a condition.
Yes, sir. And, you know, if I may just say something else briefly about that. This is an ongoing development, but it's been an ongoing development for a really long time. And so it's only natural to me that the residents who have already moved in and made homes in Phase 1 feel some frustration that they're still a part of a development that is being built out, hasn't been completed. And so absolute acknowledgement that that open space can be better maintained, can be more effectively used, and absolute comfort with the condition that requires the same, because that's exactly what the developer intends to do in connection with the completion of developing this project.
Thank you, Mr. Frank. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other questions for that? Commissioner Adams?
This might be best answered by city engineering, but is the intent that the Greenville Loop multi-use path will ultimately connect all the way to Oleander? And if so, what's the time frame of that as a completion?
That would absolutely be best answered by the city engineer. Let me defer to him to do so.
I can't wait to hear the answer.
Thank you for asking. I do not believe the plans are at 100% design, but as soon as they're at about 90% design now, I believe they're entering the property acquisition stage. So once this is complete, there'll be a multi-use trail from College Road, down Holly Tree, up Pine Grove, down the entirety of Greenville Loop Road to cross Oleander Drive, to go on to Greenville Avenue, and to connect to the Park Avenue multi-use trail.
But doesn't a portion of that exist now in front of Summerwalk?
Correct, yes. There is a small portion in front of Phase 1.
And I think the only missing part is along the gas station. Is that correct?
Correct, yeah. That's going to be constructed with Greenville Loop Phase 3, the trail Phase 3.
The trail?
Yep.
Okay.
Including the crossings that you were requesting, Mr. Coffer. There will be 2 crossings, of one across Oleander Drive and one across Greenville Avenue.
And those are part of the trail project?
That is part of the trail project.
The 2014 bond that we're now working on?
Correct.
Right, okay. So, but that's part of the trail project, not DOT's STIP?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for the applicant at this time? Thank you for answering all the questions we had.
Of course.
Mr. Frank.
Thank you very much.
And we'll see you after the public hearing. And before we open the public hearing, want to make sure you have the tools to create the most compelling arguments in favor or opposition to the project by reiterating there's a few things that have been discussed here tonight already that are really outside of our jurisdiction, and the Planning Commission purpose is to focus on the land use itself. So we are not taking into consideration any agreements between developers and the owners. That's just not part of our, I'm not making a judgment call on that either way. I'm not a judge. So, but that's just not part of what we look at when we make our decisions. So that would not be considered a compelling reason for approval or denial. And the other one is with the road improvements. Our role is to put the condition in that they be completed. So who pays for it, and if it ever happens, is not something that we'll get into. That's a little bit in the weeds for what we're here to discuss tonight. So if the improvements aren't made according to the condition, then the project can't move forward. So hope that helps. And at this time, I will open the public hearing for anyone who is here to speak in favor of the proposed agenda item number 1.
Madam Chair, just for clarification, sorry about that. You said 17 minutes, is that correct?
That's right, thank you
Thank
for
you.
reminding. Anyone here who speak in favor of agenda item 1? All right. Is there anyone here who is ready to speak in opposition of this item? Just come to the podium and begin with your name and address, and we will have our attorney Evans is going to be timing.
And if I could request, if anyone is planning to speak this evening and has not signed in on the sheet at the back of the room, please do so before you leave.
Thank you, Ms. Bradshaw.
My name is David Smith, and I live at 6014 Richard Bradley Drive. I've lived in Summerwalk for 5 years now. And I want to thank the Wilmington Planning Commission for providing an opportunity to speak on this occasion, and thanks to the many residents in attendance that are here to support denial of this request for zoning change. Okay, I'll be working it from here. Okay. 2 weeks ago, maybe a little longer now, we had a neighborhood meeting. We were presented with these plans, and it's the first time we had any inclination that anything like this was even in the works. 6-story, 5-story buildings, this kind of density, we were, quite frankly, shocked. And we've had really 2 weeks to prepare for, an answer in opposition of what's been presented. I can't hit a page down. Okay, the site and magnitude of this project, the owners are requesting 192 units, 138 one-bedroom, 54 two-bedroom, and 20,700 square feet of offices, retails on a buildable lot of 4.53. The estimated number of rental occupants would be 343 residents. The number of apartments per acre would be 42.6 units, and that's 192 divided by the 4.53 of the buildable, which exceeds the 36 units per acre required that's allowed by multiple family residential density, as I understand it. Also planned, we're going to have a lot of people working on site in retail, coffee shops, all that kind of stuff. And it's going to be restaurants, all that's going to add to the traffic on this 4.53 acre project. What we're concerned about is having a project with thousands of residents, workers, visitors daily near the Oleander-Greenville Loop intersection without the necessary highway infrastructure in place would be a serious safety concern. And at the time I bought 5 years ago, we were told coffee shop, maybe just simple items, which sounded great. And it's still, I know that the property will be developed, we understand that, but it's way over the top what we had been told when we bought into Summerwalk. This was something I saw Sunday just kind of researching. It was interesting. A project on Carolina Beach Road, a case where the developer pulled the application because the neighbors were so upset about doing this. And in this case, it was a 78-unit apartment building on 4.65. So in our case, we're looking like 4.53 buildable acres, and he's trying to do 192 apartment units, and then a 6-story retail office too. So it's a lot for that little bit of acreage. And at least this one, they went with residential multifamily moderate density, which to me makes a lot more sense than the O&I they've gone with. That's all we had. Summerwalk 1, when I moved in, it's 4 structures, all we had, and I bought in right after that. Excuse me. This is what we were shown 5 years ago when I first saw the development. He was going to do future projects below our development. There was a pond down there, future area with picnic area and all that. None of that ever happened. What's down below us now is complete swamp, overgrown. You can't even get on the trail anymore to get back. Fallen trees is just a mess down below, and I guess he's calling that the green area, but you can't even walk back there anymore. Up in the upper corner, he's got a section where he's called future commercial development, and that's what we were presented when we bought into the unit. And we're okay with, some development there. It's got to happen. Now, the zoning, developers are requesting a zoning change from community business conditional, which I think he got back in 2015, to office and institutional conditional for the project. It doesn't seem appropriate. I'm not a zoning person, but it seems like it's not appropriate for a high-density residential apartment dwelling. Now, the ONI, as I read on the Wilmington website, the district is intended to accommodate professional medical offices, institutions of various sizes, places of assembly, complementary uses without the added traffic, and the well-suited to higher education, healthcare centers, office uses. When they get down to the two-thirds down the opening sentence, when appropriate conditions are met, residential uses in combination with the compatible office and institution uses are appropriate. That tells me if somebody working in a coffee shop downstairs wants to have an apartment above it, that's like a live-work arrangement. And that kind of looks like what ONI is to me. It just seems like the 192 units is kind of an overreach for what he's trying, what they're trying to do here. Sorry. The next page is where he's coming up with 5.8, and if you look at the way his green area here is the map, he's claiming Greenville Loop Road, which I have, he's claiming the other side of Greenville Loop Road. Oh, thank you. My wife's going to help me here. Sorry. But Richard Bradley Drive, the road we drive in now, he's including that in the 5.81. If you go to, and this is what he submitted to the commission in his application. If you go to the next one and you read the fine print right in the middle, it's 5.4, or 4, how much? 4.53 is what is the buildable portion. And that's the problem. He's putting so many units into such a small piece of land, along with a retail component, which is, it's going to be a traffic nightmare. And as we know, that intersection is bad as it is. Traffic is already a significant concern to the residents. High-volume Greenville Loop morning and evening commutes. Most residents use Bagley. And let me go to the other drawing here. If you see Bagley comes off by the fire station on the other side. In the mornings, you can't get on Greenville Loop. Anybody familiar with that? You just, like, during commuting hours, forget it. We always go through Bagley Avenue in order to get to Oleander. And what he's proposing here is a right in, right out for his, for the new Summer Walk 2. There is no provision for anybody in that new development to go west on Oleander. The only way they can do it is come through our neighborhood and go up Bagley. And that's going to be a quagmire for 342 new residents. So that is a real concern for us. The last traffic impact assessment apparently was done in 2009 and updated in 2014. It seems like with the Wilmington traffic, I mean, the developer's telling us that he's having to change his zoning plans because of the increased Wilmington's change. Well, the traffic's changed too. Traffic has dramatically increased, I'm sure, since even 2014. I think I understand that we were saying there's no highway infrastructure currently in place to support such a high-density development. And like I say, we were told at the neighborhood meeting that TDOT has plans, or not TDOT, back in Tennessee, that North Carolina Department of Transportation has plans to improve all the road intersections, that kind of stuff, but that's going to be probably years down the road before that's really going to be addressed. The big thing is all those people finding a way to go west on Oleander, and that's going to be a quagmire. The next one just shows, whoops, let me back up a bit. The next one just shows Bagley, in case you're not familiar, but that's the road everybody uses in Summerwalk currently to get to Oleander. And it's relatively, you can get out on Bagley, but everybody in the new apartment building would be going the same road, and that goes down toward the fire station. And finally, the stormwater and flooding. Apparently, it's been designated as a wetland resource protection area in the 2006 CAMA plan. And last week, just out of curiosity, I decided to walk in this area. This is Richard Bradley Drive, and that section there of the old woods, that's what he's going to have to take out to build the develop. I just clear cut all that. The trees go, bushes, and we knew a development was going to be over there, and we were always hoping the bushes, we'd have some kind of sound barrier, some kind of visual barrier or something, but that's going to be clear cut. The new building would be built just about on that sidewalk that goes there. He's going to be that close to us with a 5-story building. And that's going to completely change the, I guess, the character of our neighborhood forever. If he had done this first, I'm sure a lot of people that bought in Summerwalk 1 would not have come there. It's just going to be way too congested for that 4.5 acres. And the fact that there's no green spaces with 342 new people there, we're going to have dog walkers all over. He shows green space way back in the pond, but you can't get back there. That's all overgrown. It's been a jungle for years. They're going to be using the grass where it's cut in our neighborhood to walk the dogs, and that's going to be a lot of issues with the residents living there. And once again, in conclusion, I want to thank the Planning Commission for providing this opportunity to voice opposition to the proposed zoning change. I'd also like to thank my neighbors who were able to attend the hearing and support this initiative. But we will need your help in making the correct decision and denying this application for a zone change. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Evans, how are we doing on time?
7 minutes remaining.
Okay. Is there anyone else here who would like, we did extend the time to 17 minutes. If there's anyone else here who would like to speak in opposition to this item, come to the podium and start with your name and address, and make sure Ms. Bradshaw has you signed in before you go.
Good evening. My name's Sherry O'Daniel, and I live at 6227 Tortoise Lane. Live in Turtle Hall, which is right off of Greenville Loop. So I live in the neighborhood. I also like to let everyone know that, just like you guys, I've given a lot to this community too. I served on the Wilmington Tree Commission. I was the chair for 3 years. I was on the Tree Commission for 5 years. I'm now a nonprofit that deals with our urban forest. I've been on that since 2015. I've heard the terms used, public interest, in line with the comprehensive plan, but apparently it's not in line with Wilmington's urban forest plan, which will be presented at Wilmington's council meeting on July 18th. In the report, it states that in 2016, we had a 48.1% tree canopy. In 2021, it's at 41.1% is our tree canopy. And in this report, it says the vision of the city is that we should look at trees as infrastructure, which contributes to the life and character of the city. So what do we want our character of our city to be? A concrete jungle on the coast? Or do we want to focus on trees as infrastructure that manages our stormwater, improves general quality of life and the quality of our air and our water? The Bradley Creek aquifers already been compromised, and this project changing the zoning will impact it even more so. So I say if you keep it at commercial, it will be more in line with a comprehensive plan. There's already housing that's being developed down where the old driving range is on Oleander, and there's also a huge apartment complex over Tidal Creek Co-op. So those things have been already addressed. But what is needed here is commercial. Right now, for me to go to, I've lived in this area for over 17 years off of Greenville Loop, and I've seen flooding, increased traffic, and for me to go to the grocery store, there's either Lowe's or I have to go across the bridge to Mayfair or to Wrightsville Beach. So, changing the zone, it's not going according to comprehensive plan. It needs to be commercial and stay at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. O'Daniel. Mr. Evans, what kind of time do we have left?
2 minutes and 5 seconds.
All right, we have 2 minutes and
I'm sorry, it's a little more than that. My math's not great.
Okay.
Good evening, John Brosnan, 6310 Greenville Sound Road. Just wanted to mention, I guess, as Mr. Pollock, you had asked some questions about what would be promised to somebody regarding the developer, and I know the chair lady said that's not an issue tonight, but it is for everybody who bought there 2017, 2018 into the neighborhood. Mr. Penton's sitting here and didn't get up and say one word about why he should be, in favor of this. When we bought in this neighborhood, we were told it was not going to be multifamily home. It was going to be small office space and small retail with limited height restriction. And that's gone out the window. And frankly, I'll be honest with you, I don't think we need to hear any more from Mr. Frank. I mean, he's a very eloquent speaker, but he doesn't need to address any of these complaints. I mean, we've heard it. We have worked hard as a neighborhood, as an HOA, to try to get representation. But Mr. Penton has hired so many attorneys in town, we could not get one attorney to represent us here this evening. And I think you should take into consideration the fact that it's been very difficult as a member of the HOA, on the board of the HOA, and in the neighborhood. Mr. Penton's the chairman of the Master Association, and he has yet to sit down with the HOAs for the towns or the cottages. And so his unwillingness to work with us and his lack of trust is a statement that if it couldn't be trusted on a smaller development, it certainly shouldn't be trusted on a scale of 192 apartments. Thank you.
14:30 right now.
14 seconds?
I'm sorry, 14 minutes and 30 seconds.
Oh, we're at 14 minutes. So we have still, 2.5 minutes left.
Madam Chair, I think the city attorney should work the door and let Ms. Linda come back.
Y'all knew that was a mistake when I volunteered to keep time, but I apologize.
You're doing fine.
Hey everybody, my name is Libby Kay and I live at 3660 Watch Hill Way. Thank you very much for your time tonight. You've heard a lot, but a couple of those things I think should be addressed by people who live there. One of which being you asked about provisions that might stand against this development already being not in compliance with what the city has. One of those is stormwater. So we do have drainage basins. Those currently are not functioning as designed. We've actually had the stormwater team from the city of Wilmington out who confirmed that things that were said to be having done, planting 400 plants in those drainage beds, have not actually been completed. They were signed off by an engineer. The stormwater engineer from Wilmington said that clearly hadn't been done. They're overgrown, they're not functioning. That will impact us, especially when that master HOA is turned over. We will have to fund that. We will have to come up with that. So this rezoning might open. We already know that those buildings are going to be placed on top of existing drainage beds. So those are going to go away, only exacerbating that problem. That's a concern for everybody who lives in that development and also anywhere else around that neighborhood. Another thing I'd like to bring up is the need for this apartment building, or these apartment buildings, the high residential. There are 8 different projects, 2 of which are going in right now.
1 minute.
Namely Center Point in Mayfair and the Range going on Oleander Drive. Those are massive projects. We clearly have a lot of apartment complexes going up within a 1 to 3 mile radius of Summerwalk already. I don't think that that necessarily places this as the best place for such a high residential entity. So thank you for your time. I hope I left some time for someone else.
Thank you, Ms. Payne. The public hearing is now closed. Thank you. Mr. Frank, would you like to come back to the mic?
Yes, ma'am, Madam Chair. Notwithstanding Mr. Brosnan's request, I would like to exercise my right to speak with you briefly if I could. Mr. Penton's not a terribly popular person in this room. I read the comments that came in online too. I get it. Thank goodness popularity is not one of the factors that we take into account in connection with whether or not this is an appropriate zoning. I do want to clarify something absolutely, and that is that the first community meeting where we proposed the initial version of this design was held on March 14th of this year. And so I respect what Mr. Smith said. I'm not sure how he came to learn about the project for the first time a couple weeks ago. But we've been contemplating a mixed-use development that incorporates multifamily residential for a significant period of time, and have been very open with the community, both through meetings directly with the POA stakeholders, and also through, by design, community meetings, multiple of them, with neighbors. With regard to traffic, what's critical to consider here is that this change will not have any discernible impact on the ultimate traffic that goes onto the road. Second,
The public
these-
hearing is closed. Go ahead.
Pardon me, ma'am. Second, these are public roads. Oleander Drive, Greenville Loop are both public roads. Thankfully, they have gotten the attention of the NCDOT. The improvements that need to be made to them based on the experts telling us what improvements need to be made, including taking development of phase 2 into account, have been approved and have been approved for funding or on a schedule. This development, and something I should have mentioned earlier, is really an important factor. This development incorporates an additional point of ingress and egress from the total Summerwalk development onto Oleander Drive. So if you're eastbound on Oleander Drive and want to go into Summerwalk, whether you want to go into Summerwalk Phase 1 or Phase 2, you can use that new entrance and avoid coming down Greenville Loop and Sir Bradley Drive to get there. Second, Mr. Smith noted that there was no way to leave the new portion of the development without driving through the neighborhood and out Bagley if you wanted to go west, and that's simply not accurate. You would leave the new portion of the development to go west by using Sir Bradley Drive and Greenville Loop Road. Several people in the room, including us, have complained about the condition of these public roads. We all acknowledge that they need improvement. There's only one private citizen sitting in this room who's paid any money out of their own pocket to fix it. This applicant has spent over $750,000 to contribute to improvements on the public roads and improvements to the multi-use path. And that fact shouldn't be lost in this analysis. Community needs are absolutely dynamic. We update our comp plan every 10 years. According to the School of Government, we must update our comp plan every 10 years. Land use needs change, population changes. Sometimes we experience a pandemic that completely flips our interest in office space on its head. It is absolutely appropriate that from time to time, landowners and the city planning arm reevaluate what the appropriate and best use is for a piece of land. That said, change is hard. I understand that absolutely. In this case, there are several people who purchased 119 homes adjacent to a vacant piece of property, and with the expectation, based on the then current zoning, that the use of the property next to them was going to be primarily office. I get it. I understand that our changing in response to the needs of the greater community is uncomfortable for the people who live immediately next door to it. Ultimately, our charge as a landowner is to develop this land in the way that is most appropriately suited to serve the market demands and the needs of the city. And I'd offer that your charge in evaluating whether or not this proposed rezoning is a good idea is to evaluate the proposed new design on its merits relative to the comp plan, relative to the growth strategies map, and relative to the policies that you've set forth to encourage all landowners to follow. Thank you. I'm glad to answer any further questions you might have.
Commissioners, do you have any questions for the applicant? Commissioner Adams?
Sam, the second phase, are all the buildings contemplated to be built concurrently, or is there any thought that 2 of the 3 or 1 of the 3 would be built, or, you know, in phases?
So I can guess, but let me get an exact answer if you'll forgive me for turning around and asking my client. I'll be right back. The hope is to construct all 3 buildings at one time.
Commissioner Lennon?
Did your client have to cut down any trees to create the first phase of Summerwalk?
I'm certain he did.
Thank you. Actually, on that point, there's some, forgive me, what's the right word, legacy trees that are still in that first phase, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
Yes,
Which I'm assuming he went to expense to protect.
they must have if they're still there, absolutely. It's always more expensive to protect them.
Thank you.
All right, if we are, Commissioner Cofer.
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. Just one question, Mr. Frank, to clarify and confirm, I don't know the answer, how we confirm. The materials that were submitted by the applicant that's come into question, 4.53 acres versus 5.82, could you speak to that?
Yeah, the buildable, well, as Ms. Smith described earlier, there's not a density cap. But the buildable acres is not the denominator for the dwelling units per acre, the way we do it in the city. We do it based on the total acreage. And the total acreage of the site is 5.82 acres.
Does that have to do with wetlands or something on the site that's not buildable?
We don't have our land planner with us, and so I can't tell you which aspects of the project would have been reduced from the 5.82 to get to the 4.5 that Mr. Smith alluded to.
Not a worry. Well, I can ask Nicole afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Pollack?
Yeah, Mr. Frank, as you look over the package, I'm sure you've seen the same thing we have, and there's I think it's section 2.5, recommended conditions for approval. Is there anything in that list of 19 that you or your client take exception to, or are you supportive of all those 19?
Yes, sir. There are two conditions explicitly that we propose be changed. And I know I was talking fast when I spoke earlier. I think we can get those back on the screen again, and I can review those proposed changes. Thank you, Brian. Again, that first one to condition 5 is really just a clarification. It wasn't the intent of staff to propose a condition that prohibited residential use. It's just a leftover language, and our correction here clarifies that. The change to the second condition is in the name of saying something specific now rather than an agreement to agree, and belaboring the city attorney's office to figure it out later.
Commissioner Lennon?
And I'm sorry, just to clarify, and these aren't a surprise to staff, right?
I don't want to speak for staff, but I have discussed them in detail with staff.
Okay.
By all means, ask if they're in agreement to it directly, though I don't want to speak for them.
Okay,
Staff is agreeable to the revisions on your screen.
thank you.
Thank you, great question. I have one kind of big picture question to throw at you because we hear this comment a lot. The background is the CDMU has resulted in a lot of projects that are on really visible roadways because we're trying to get housing close to services, which is a best practice in planning. So the myth, it appears, perception-wise, when people drive to work, drive down the major corridors, it looks like there's too many apartments. The city does our own studies, and we know that we're in a severe shortage of housing in general. That's one of the reasons the costs have gone up so much. But tell us from a developer's perspective who's spending tens of millions of dollars building multifamily, what process do you go through to determine whether there's market demand for apartments?
So the end of your question is the important conclusion, which is developers build what we believe the market needs and the market demands, what will be consumed by the citizens of our community. And so the analysis of where does the supply-demand curve stand on the supply side, we look at exactly the same things the city does. What's available today? What types of housing product and also what volume of those types of housing product are available to our citizens today? On the demand side, we evaluate from existing projects, both of our own and of others, what's being consumed. What are our citizens grabbing? What are people choosing to rent? What are people choosing to buy? What's the format? What's the price point? And then the feasibility analysis for the proposed development is driven largely by what we as a development community believe will be absorbed most quickly by the citizens in the given community. And so I agree with you. There is because there have been so many single-family homes for so long in our community, and so many of the new developments that are on the very visible public roads are multifamily today, there is sort of this misperception that we're building too many apartments and not enough new single-family homes. As someone who represents both multifamily developers and people who build single-family homes, I can assure you that in our community, we're building a lot of single-family homes too. And the need for both types of housing is great, and the need for multifamily is even greater.
Thank you. Any other questions for the applicant? Mr. Kofer?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. On the condition number 13, it talks about perpetual maintenance and upkeep of the open space and stormwater management ponds. It shall be provided by an incorporated homeowners association. The open space opinion seems to be seemingly both phases, so that perpetual maintenance and upkeep, there'll be some sort of shared, I guess, agreement there for open space maintenance?
Yes, sir. So first and most importantly, the applicant is comfortable with that condition exactly as you read it. And second, the plan over time is that ultimately all of the common areas of the community, the master community, are owned by that incorporated master homeowners association. And the maintenance and upkeep of those master amenities are performed by that entity.
So the stormwater management will fall into that with regards to the drainage basins for Phase 1 and then stormwater for Phase 2?
Let me ask real quick to verify.
Okay.
So Commissioner Kofer, it's a single stormwater permit for the total development, and ultimately that permit, which is issued by the state, will be held by the master association, and the master association will be responsible for complying with that permit, which includes the responsibility to maintain the stormwater facilities.
Thank you.
Anything else for the applicant? Commissioner Lennon?
Last thing, the workforce housing units.
Yes, sir.
So it was brought up earlier that you're able to essentially double the density. So, but to the chair's point, where'd that come from? The removal of that cap? I mean, I'm asking where.
Yes, sir. So I believe it was 2.5 years ago or so, we, the city, made a decision to change our code and specifically to incorporate that provision that allows for greater density when a certain level of workforce housing is incorporated into the development. It's a policy decision. It's a decision we made as a city to encourage workforce homes, but also to recognize that an efficient way to do that is to incorporate additional density into developments. And so I think I might have said earlier that additional height affords us enough room to be able to incorporate workforce homes into this development, and that's exactly true. To be clear, the workforce homes are interspersed throughout the buildings. It's not like, just the top floor or whatever.
And in fact, your client's prohibited from isolating them in one area.
We don't have any desire to. In this case, there's a condition that says we won't. I don't know whether the code without the condition requires it, but it's not, it's what we're going to do.
So said another way, policymakers at the time, we weren't policymakers, but recommenders, I guess, at the time, created a carrot in response to a serious problem. Is that fair?
That's my understanding.
And your client's taking advantage of that, which was the intent?
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lennon. All right, any other questions? Can we let the applicant sit down? All right, thank you, Mr. Frank.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
We normally don't break until we are finished with an item, but Mr. Attorney, is there any issue with given the closed captioners, we gotta give the closed captioners a break every 2 hours. Can we break before and come back and deliberate and finish the item?
Yes, Madam
Are
Chair,
you-
that's fine. That's
Okay.
totally your call.
Okay, we will take about a 10-minute break, and we're back here at 8:10. All right, we are back. All right, commissioners, we are still looking at agenda item number 1. We're still number 1. And it's time for us to deliberate. So what are your thoughts on this one? Commissioner Pollock?
Yeah, I'll go first. The two areas of concern that I had when I read the package and before we came in tonight are still the same two areas I have. Are the density, because I realize, by right as opposed to what's being asked. I'm just concerned with the density trying to be shoehorned into this, and that's my word, not anybody else's. And secondly is, we've talked a lot about traffic, but I still think traffic is a much unresolved discussion for my particular palate, so I'm just having a hard time supporting this right now, just to be very blunt.
Okay. Commissioner Cofer?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your comments. Commissioner Pollock, wow, yeah. I think first, I just like to back up a step and recognize that so much planning goes into the comprehensive growth strategies maps, and so much planning goes into the comprehensive plan. And we have, the city of Wilmington has so many small area plans. And all these plans, they've been in motion for over almost better part of 2 decades. And they've kept growing and they've kept getting tweaked. And those plans aren't just coming from our professional, very well-educated staff or your elected officials at the council meeting. It's also coming from stakeholders, members of the public that come out and talk about what they want to see their city become. When I do the discrete structures, the math with words of our land development code, the plan, what's being proposed fits. I mean, it truly does. There's a bullseye around that intersection on the growth strategies maps. Just every one of the hundreds and hundreds of pages that I read when I chase the math with words, the plan fits. My problem, though, subjectively, as one of your commissioners, is that it does fit perfectly the discrete structures. It's genius. I feel like we're meeting the minimums and removing the ceilings, and that gives me pause. I feel like if this plan, my thing's gonna be height, and I'm sorry, I'm not a visionary. I know that vertical integration is a part of this city's future. I'm just not quite comfortable with it on this particular site. And I think Mr. Frank said a natural human reaction. That's my natural human reaction is the height. I look at the baby's hospital on the site next to Summer Rest Road. I could see that on the corner right there at, Oleander and Greenville Loop. That's 4 stories, genius urban solutions with parking underneath. I'm just struggling with that 5th floor. I'm struggling with the 60 feet. So with that being said, it's probably a no for me right now as it's presented.
Commissioner Woodruff?
Down the Similar Road, just a couple of things. There's no doubt this property is going to get developed. I mean, it's been there for a long time now. in the simplest of terms, I think it's just an overreach at this point. I appreciate the offer of affordable housing and you're taking advantage of it, which is why it's there. But it doesn't also in turn mean go to the max, get as much as you can get in there. I don't know what a magic number might be. I agree with Mr. Cofer that maybe a lower structure, just less density. It may not appease everybody on this side of the room, I don't know. But I would find it much more acceptable than the present plan. The idea that, it's not going to impact the traffic because it's bad, well, this is going to make it bad plus. Again, I'm sympathetic to those in phase one. You can't rely on what was over 10 years ago now, 12 years ago. Things do change. And I think the applicant is desirous and rightfully so to do something. I think there should be more commercial than what is being intended now. There was more commercial, but there was still land to be developed that you could put residential. Obviously, the reason we're here today is because you want residential, and I would not be opposed to residential, but not at this level. So I too will probably vote no.
Commissioner Adams?
The density is aggressive, but in some ways I think it has spurred some creative land use ideas, particularly with the structured parking. So I guess I'm not as opposed to the density. I actually like the vertical mixed use integration of this newly proposed phase 2 versus a strictly commercial phase 2 as originally approved. I do think though that I would highly encourage you, if this does move forward, it's one because of some of the issues about height and mass and scale, that the devil could really be in the details. We're not in the business of dictating architecture, but there are a lot of ways through design of the streetscapes, design of the edges of phase 1 and phase 2, eliminating, flat roofs versus pitched roofs to make the building heights comparable. Again, a lot of these things could be done, I think, to tie physically and perceptually these two phases together better. It is in a location where traffic is an issue. I drive down Greenville Loop a lot, but I realize that there are protections in place about traffic, off-site traffic improvements needing to be complete as a prerequisite sometimes for projects to be occupied. And I think that the condition 6 that has been discussed is intending to do that. I also appreciate the fact that this is on a multimodal, multi-use trail, so there is a whole different ability to engage non-vehicular users to either come here or leave from here. And I also think that, again, the mix of uses here could provide the phase 1, the residents that are here, a way to utilize services without getting in their car and driving somewhere. So there are a lot of things about this project I like, but again, I would say as you move forward, or if you move forward in design, think hard about the details of architecture, streetscape, buffers, because I think they could really make a big difference in how these two phases relate to one another.
Thank you, Commissioner Adams. Commissioner Lennon?
With all due respect to my fellow commissioners, with the exception of Commissioner Adams' comment about the last part about some of the site components, I think the rest of you are wrong. I don't ever talk about my personal stuff, but I leave Greenville Loop every day, and I turn left on Greenville Loop Road every single day. And I wait through 2 light cycles, just like everybody else does, to turn left. I raised 3 kids, all of whom went to New Hanover and had to turn left on Greenville, on Oleander, every day. Has it changed a lot? It sure has. It's changed a whole lot in 20 years. And I thank God for it, because my property taxes stay where they are, relatively speaking, because more people are moving here, adding to the coffers. And they are coming, and we're not going to stop them. And those of you who have watched these meetings, you must be really bored, but if you've watched these meetings before, you've heard me say this, they're coming no matter what we do here. They are coming. We have a deficit of roughly 17,000 rental units over the next 10 years in this city and 13,000 single-family dwellings over the next 10 years. That's not based on people wanting to upgrade. That's based on people that are coming here and need a place to live. The whole reason that this body, a lot of us on here, and a lot that preceded me, spent time working on the new land development code was a direct result of a demand that the city has. I don't mean demand from council or from the state, a real demand for housing. So every element of the LDC was designed to make it easier to create more housing. And if we don't do that, then people are going to stop coming, and your property, because they can't find anything. Today, this morning, there were 397 properties for sale in New Hanover County, not including the beaches. That's it. That's all that was for sale. So the concept of doing transportation improvements before you build something, that should have come up when we were working on the LDC. Mr. Frank is correct that one's a state road, the other one's a city road. And if those improvements should have been made across the city to accommodate this growth that was coming, we should have laid that out there with the LDC. That's not what we did. We told developers, if you incorporate workforce housing, affordable housing, these different components in your design plan, we'll give you credits to achieve density so we can build more housing. So if we're not going to do that, this is, I can think of several projects where, and forgive me because I am one of your neighbors, but this is one of several projects where people in the neighborhood have said, seems like a good idea, just the wrong place. Where is the right place? And I can tell you that I would much prefer to have residential units than a grocery store or a retail store or a coffee shop or any of the other things that were listed as these businesses. I mean, and that's the other part of this, is the market has dictated what's going to happen. Everybody know where Fairfield Park is, the old fairgrounds? That was supposed to be a Harris Teeter 25 years ago. It never got built because they sold 204 residential units behind it and couldn't sell one piece of commercial property on that project. And now it's all multifamily and single-family housing. That wasn't the developer's idea, that was a response to market conditions. I'm going to vote in favor of this because this is what we, the city of Wilmington, agreed to do when we implemented the new LDC.
Thank you, Commissioner Lennon. Well, I'm in favor of this project as well. It's big. There's no doubt about it, it's big. And in an ideal world, it would be a similar scale to what's already there and make everybody happy, but ideal world isn't on the table. Our community is desperate for housing, desperate, and even more desperate for workforce housing, and that is why the incentive was built into the code, and it's working, and the CDMU is working, and this is an example of how it works. And these aren't easy decisions for anybody, but for what we have to measure the proposal against, it does meet all the requirements, and I don't see any reason to deny this developer from moving forward. Any other comments, questions? Commissioner Cofer?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one comment. I just really applaud Commissioner Lennon for sharing those thoughts. I've never heard him speak from the heart so deeply, and that was really educational for me as one of your rookie members on this board. and any of your comments as well, Madam Chair. I don't believe at this time I'm compelled to change my initial thoughts, but I really appreciate hearing that, John. Thank you.
Anyone else? All right. Well, just to set the stage here, we're an even number tonight. It looks like Mr. Frank has something to say. I'll allow it.
I don't want to interrupt your deliberations, but will I have an opportunity to ask whether we're inclined to ask you to move forward or continue before you make a motion to vote?
You'd like to continue is that what you're saying?
I'm asking whether we'll have an opportunity to make that suggestion or request.
Mr. Attorney, do you have any issue with that?
Madam Chair, that's completely up to you. There hasn't been a vote yet, so it's your call.
Okay.
It would take a motion and a vote to do so at this point in time.
That's right. We are just wrapping up our deliberations, so, and have not put any motions on the table, so is that the request?
Based on your deliberations, I think that there are things that we could do to adapt this application. I can't be specific because I don't know exactly what they are yet. But based on that, if you would do us the honor of continuing this matter and giving us an opportunity to work with staff to see if there are potential revisions that might be more acceptable to you commissioners, we'd appreciate the opportunity to do so.
And you like that, a date certain of August 2nd?
I think we ought to go 2 months
Okay.
because whatever we change on the plan, we'll need to hold another community meeting, and I want to allow time for that.
So that would be September 6th.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
All right, would anyone like to make a motion to that
yeah.
effect? Commissioner
No,
Paul?
I will. No, I think that's fair. So I'll make a motion that the Planning Commission allow the applicant to extend until the September meeting, or continue is the right phrase. That's my motion.
All right, Commissioner Pollack has moved to continue item number 1 to a date certain of September 6th. Is there a
Second.
second? Oh, and let me double check. Ms. Bradshaw, is that Labor Day week? Are we still on the 6th, or is it a different date?
Yes, ma'am, it is Labor Day week, and you will have a meeting that week.
It will be on the 6th, okay.
Yes, thank you.
All right, so the motion is to continue item 1 to a date certain of September 6th. Is there a second? Second by Commissioner Woodruff. We'll do a voice vote. All in favor? Aye. For that? All right, well, after all that work, we're going to continue it, so we'll see you in 2 months. And we'll give the audience a moment to clear out, and then we'll continue our meeting. Yeah, maybe it'll come back with some good changes. We'll move on to agenda item number 2, a conditional district rezoning of the property containing 23.33 acres located at 3818 Carolina Beach Road and 3930 Independence Boulevard from R15, moderate density single dwelling, to MD17 CD, high density multiple dwelling residential conditional district for proposed 242-unit multi-dwelling development. And our staff report is will be done by Mr. Chambers.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. The site is located on the north side of Independence Boulevard at the intersection with Carolina Beach Road. 23 acres in size, currently vacant. This map shows you the site in the context of the surrounding area. The Southgate single-family subdivision to the north, the Crossroads Commercial Center to the south across Independence. We have several photos on the right-hand side of the screen that show the current condition of the site. Here's the existing conditions surrounding the property. Looking north on Carolina Beach Road, you'll see a religious institution. Directly to the south on Independence is an existing apartment complex. The bottom left would be a look from the Crossroads Center back towards the property at Independence, and then there, the bottom right would be the Harris Teeter that exists in the Crossroads. Here's some photos from the adjacent single-family subdivision to the north, looking from Hollins Road, and then the bottom picture would be looking from Pershing Court. The site is surrounded by residential and commercial zoning. A single-dwelling neighborhood and religious institution, as I previously stated, is located to the north. Multiple dwelling apartments are located to the south, and the Crossroads Center is located to the south across Independence. There's a gas station located to the east across Carolina Beach Road. The applicant is proposing to rezone this site from R15 to an MD17 conditional district for a 257-unit residential development. The project includes 242 apartments within 5 buildings, with 5 4-story buildings, and then 15 townhomes located in 5 2-story buildings. The applicant proposes to construct a new residential collector street off of Independence to provide access to the property. The street would include a right-in, right-out condition at Independence Boulevard. The proposal also includes a secondary access on Carolina Beach Road, which would also be restricted to a right-in, right-out access. Traffic data indicates that Carolina Beach Road and Independence in this location are currently operating within their design capacity. The trip generation data that we've put together indicates that there would be an increase in the estimated vehicle trips when associated with the current build-out under the current zoning. Based on that trip generation, a traffic impact analysis is and was required and is currently under review by our MPO staff. The proposal would require a minimum of 467 parking spaces, allow for a maximum of 707, and the applicant is proposing 504. There'd be a minimum of 30 bicycle parking spaces required, and a multi-use path would be required along the Independence Boulevard frontage, and this will connect to the existing path located to the west of the property. Staff has also included a recommendation that a signalized pedestrian crosswalk be provided across Independence Boulevard to allow residents to access the commercial services across the street at the Crossroads Center. There would be a 20-foot wide transitional buffer required to the adjacent single-family neighborhood, and any trees or shrubs located within that buffer would be required to be retained. There are a significant amount of wetlands on site. The majority of these wetlands are being protected. However, there are a couple of impacts that allows for the road to traverse the site. A wetland impact permit will be required for these improvements prior to construction release. The site is located within a greenfield site mixed-use place area of opportunity and along a high-capacity transfer route as contemplated by our growth strategies map. The comprehensive plan calls for infill development that maintains and enhances the character and increases housing options. The plan calls for new residential development to set aside usable open space and preferred natural landscapes and high-quality ecological resources. The plan also calls for an increase in residential density along our transit routes and near commercial services. Proposed zoning would allow for a quality of infill that is compatible. It provides an increase in residential density near the services. The Crossroads Center located directly across the street and is located along an identified transit route, and it preserves a significant amount of natural area and open space. That being said, staff does believe this request is consistent with our comprehensive plan, is reasonable in the public interest, and is recommending commissional approval. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have, and the applicant is prepared to make a presentation as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chambers. Commissioners, do you have any questions for staff? Commissioner Adams?
Brian, did I hear correct that both entrances to the development off both Carolina Beach and Independence are right in, right out?
Yes. That's what's currently proposed in the traffic impact analysis that's under review.
Okay. Okay. This seems highly unusual, just that all points of ingress are sort of one-way movements. Is that an issue with this project?
I'd have to defer to the developer as to what they contemplated. I believe that was, and they can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that was something that they proposed as part of the analysis they submitted for review to the WMPO. The difficulty with making a left out on Carolina Beach Road is obvious. On Independence, you would be making a left across several lanes of traffic, so it would also be a dangerous movement. But I think I would defer to them, and maybe our transportation folks would be able to answer that a little bit better.
Commissioner Lennon?
Brian, there were several comments in regards to further down Independence at River Road too. And those, are there any, maybe cutting ahead, but are there any updates to that intersection or new things to share in regards to that?
The city continues to work with the developers of River Lights and the proposed redevelopment of the Watermark Marina to make improvements to the intersection of River Road and Independence. We met today to discuss that plan moving forward, so it does have traction. I couldn't give you a time frame when it happens, but we are working on that diligently to get that plan put in place and get that roundabout constructed.
Okay, and just, I'm remembering back to the Watermark folks that, if I remember correctly, the River Lights developer had an agreement in which they were to make those improvements, and that was extended by the city. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Brian, real quick question on the, can you go back one chart to show keep going, right there. On the kind of the top part, there's a lot of, forestation, vegetation, trees back there. Will that buffer between that and the single-family homes stay, or can you help the commission understand? There's some, I know there's some property lines of demarcation. Could you just get into that a little bit real quick?
Right. All the areas you see outside of the parking and the road, it's my understanding will remain undisturbed. There's a lot of wetlands in those areas as well. There is, you'll see on the top of the screen, I don't know if I can get an arrow up to it or not, there's a 30-foot strip of fee simple property that separates this property from the adjacent single family, which prohibits any kind of future road connection. But on the flip side of that, it's a 30-foot undisturbed buffer that will also remain undisturbed. So in essence, they do have a 50-foot buffer there that would be undisturbed.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Lennon?
I'm sorry, you may have said this. I was trying to read the teeny print. Who owns that 30-foot strip?
I don't know off the top of my head.
The applicant may be able to address that. Okay.
Commissioner Kofer?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Chambers, on the last application, we had one of the conditions, I think, was number 18 with regards to specimen trees being preserved that are not in the buildable footprint or ingress, egress roads. I mean, is that something that was discussed here between staff and applicant, or not necessary? Or?
We discussed that on all the projects. To my knowledge, there's no specimen trees being proposed to be removed. I think there's a few significant trees that will be required to be removed based on the improvement shown on the screen, and they would require mitigation.
Thank you.
Any more questions for staff? All right, thank you, Mr. Chambers.
Thank
and
you.
the applicant is here. Is that right?
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. My name is Colin Tarrant. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Block, Crouch, and Keeter here in Wilmington. I'm here on behalf of the applicant. I'm here along with our development team, which I'll take some time to introduce to you now. We have Edmund Waddell, who's here from the applicant, Chaucer Creek Capital LLC. Mr. Brian Genest is our landscape architect and site design. We have Chuck Travis here, who's also our architect, and Reinald Stevenson is here as our traffic engineer. They'll be available to answer any questions you have. Obviously, they've got certain areas of expertise that are outside my purview, and I'd rather have them answer those questions than have you listen to me fumble around trying to get you an answer that may or may not be correct. That being said, we do have a presentation for you. I do not want to repeat what staff has already said. Obviously, they provided you with their report in the agenda packet, and they've done a thorough and complete job of outlining our application. Midtown Junction is the name of our proposed 257-unit multifamily development. It's going to consist of a mix of 1, 2, and 3-bedroom units and associated amenities that will go along with the project, including a leasing office, clubhouse, fitness facility, pool, dog park, racket courts. I do want to point out that I believe the first page on the agenda indicates that the project is a 242-unit development. It's 242 units of multifamily and then 15 units of townhomes for a total of 257. The rest of the report does indicate a 257-unit development, but I did just want to point that out, that the agenda does have an error in that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. As staff has stated, this is our application seeking a conditional rezoning of the property from an R15 to an MD17 zoning district, obviously to construct and operate our proposed multifamily development. This will be done in accordance with the LDC for the MD17 zoning district, and despite the allowable density under the requested MD17 zoning district, allowing for a total of approximately 396 units, the applicant's proposal is about 139 units less than that of allowable density. This reduced density is the result of the applicant's considerable effort to work with some very unique topographical and environmental attributes of the property, as well as its location along Carolina Beach Road and Independence Boulevard. So as you can see, we have got 2 parcels, as indicated on the slide before you, a parcel A consisting of 13.37 acres and a parcel B that's consisting of about 10 acres with a total acreage of 23.33. As staff pointed out, the current zoning of these 2 parcels is R15. There is an area of MD17 located to the south of the proposed project. That's the existing Hawthorne at Any West multifamily development, and then to the north is the Southgate single-family R10. We do have the area of commercial across the street. That's the new Harris Teeter Shopping Center. This is an indication of the current layout, showing the location of the proposed area to both the multifamily and residential, as well as the commercial areas located close to the proposed project. Here we have our site plan overlaid into that currently vacant area so that the board may see how the layout will fit in with the surrounding area. This is our site plan. Staff has gone over the site plan. It's been included in your project. The site plan is the result of months and months of work with staff, with our development team, with the neighbors, to try to come up with a plan that not only fits with the comprehensive plan, with the land development code, but also with what we believe is best for the community, what the community seems to have indicated to us that they would like to see in this particular area, and that best meets the criteria that's set out for us by the city and staff to provide a high-quality development project. We're constrained by our corner location.
That is your time limit? You need a little bit more time?
Just a little bit. I'll
Okay.
go quickly. We're constrained by our corner location, and we did point out those 2 areas of ingress and egress on Carolina Beach Road and Independence Boulevard, and we have proposed, as of right now, a right in and right out. We have a large area of wetlands, and let me go through this rather quickly. As you can see, those 2 wetlands cut through the middle of the property. You'll notice to the north, there is a stub for what's indicated here as a Pershing Court. It's located directly where that area of wetlands cuts through the property. But you'll also see that our design and the way in which the layout is set up on the proposed site takes into account the fact that we've got these wetlands to the south along the border with what's the Hawthorne and any west, as well as cutting through to the north. That being said, we've been able to really work through that process. You'll see the 2 areas of wetland disturbance. There's actually 3. These are indicated by the hatched area. Other than that, we're trying to maintain and not disturb those wetlands. And then here are the 2 areas of ingress and egress. And as I've stated, Mr. Stevenson is here to answer any questions that you may have regarding the TIA that's been submitted and is currently under review, as well as our proposed plan. And as of that, I won't take up any more of your time unless the board has some specific questions, but we do respectfully request approval of this project in accordance with staff's recommendation. We're here and available to answer any specific questions, and I do have a few more things, but essentially staff has covered it, which is that we've met all the criteria set out in the Land Development Code as well as the comprehensive plan.
Thank you. Any questions for the Commissioner Adams?
Thanks for the clarification on units, like numbers and types. Is there a mix of for rent versus ownership as part of this redevelopment, or is it strictly all rental?
So my understanding is that this is strictly all rental, and as I said, we do have Mr. Waddell here from the applicant who could probably answer specific questions, but this would be a completely for rent community.
Commissioner Lennon?
So the TIA is still in process?
That's correct. It was included with our application and submitted back in April, I believe, and there has been a request for some clarification, and I believe that those responses have been provided. Is that correct? So we have responded to those requests, and it's still currently under review. Now, I will point out that we did appear before the Design Adjustment Committee, which approved a preliminary plan for this project, and part of the conditions for approval at DAC required the site plan to incorporate any of the recommendations that go with the return of this TIA.
Can you say that another way?
Whatever the TIA recommends, that we have to incorporate that into our site plan.
Hard stop. Got it.
I apologize.
Anyone else? Commissioner Pollack?
Yeah, it's just a statement I would like to hear. You just alluded to the traffic thing, and I thank Commissioner Lennon for bringing that up, where you said you've responded, made some recommendations or responses in just a real summary fashion, either you or your traffic person. Can you just elaborate what that is real quick?
I'll defer to Mr. Stevenson.
Yeah.
Sure. Good evening, Ronald Stevenson with Ramey Kemp Associates. And the comments we've received thus far are relatively minor. They were related to the recent work that was done at Independence, at Harris Teeter, to kind of restripe Independence and get additional laneage there. So the comments really centered around making sure that the traffic study had that accounted for exactly like it was marked in the field.
How far up the road is this development from Independence and River Road, that intersection? Is that a couple miles? I can't.
Yeah, it's pretty far down, and I think what I wanted to say relative to that and that concern earlier was that in our traffic study and working with MPO, city staff, DOT, we had 95% of our traffic going in the other directions. So we only had 5% of our traffic going to and from River Road intersection.
So your view is they make a right turn on Independence, come down and somehow make a U-turn and head back to town?
Correct. Well, what I do want to point out, and I think there was a question earlier about the right-in, right-outs, is that having right-in, right-out at both locations is pretty critical, I think, to being able to navigate around. We're already going to be challenged a little bit, but I think what we would anticipate is folks would not necessarily have to go out Independence and go down and make a U-turn somewhere there. They can make a right turn on Carolina Beach, onto Carolina Beach and go left, south, or go right and then go up Independence or south towards Carolina Beach. But but having two points of access is going to be key to having folks be able to circulate in and out in multiple directions.
Thanks for the clarification.
Yes, sir.
Just because we've talked so much tonight already about traffic, I want to make sure people understand, you didn't just randomly direct 5% of your traffic to River Road.
That's correct, yeah. And I also want to point out, too, there are a lot of work goes into and coordination and cooperation with MPO, city staff, and NCDOT just to get a traffic study ready to submit for review. So staff, and I know Scott and Dennis are here, but they review things very carefully, all aspects of this, from access to how many trips are going to generate, where the traffic's going to and from. So all of that's been reviewed and approved at this point. So we're down to really, at this point, sort of the final recommendations of what would be needed there.
So they really write the scoping letter.
Correct. And the scope is a series of back and forth. We submit information, they comment on it, we agree on what that needs to be, then we move to the next step, do the same thing. So it's a series of, like I said, submittals and reviews to get us to this point. So they've been heavily involved in the process. Yes, sir.
Commissioner Kofer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate your comments so far. Just one question, because you satisfied my inability to visualize. I'm kind of was sitting there thinking, if I was taking a ride on Independence, I might whip around in Hawthorne at Indy West to get back around, but you can take a ride on Carolina Beach Road and achieve the same goal.
Yes, sir.
And are you saying that you can take a left onto Carolina Beach Road as well from that exit?
No, sir. To head back to the north on Carolina Beach Road, you would have to come out. We would anticipate, let's see, I don't know if this will work. There you go. We would have to come out, more than likely come out, make a right-hand turn here, make a U-turn at the intersection to head back to the north, or make a left to go up, Independence, depending on where you're going. So to head back north, that's what you would
either way, your flow is not going to really affect the folks at the Indy West. I mean,
we're not anticipating that just because of having the multiple, access points.
And,
Yes,
and last question would be, I'm always excited to see crosswalks and walkability and those ingredients come into life. So is that WMPO? Is that you guys? How does that work? I don't understand that.
Are you referring to the crosswalk condition? Yeah, that's what we'll have to do with that is, as we get beyond rezone and start looking at specific design plans, we'll have to look at exactly where that crosswalk kind of ties in at each corner of the intersection and adjust the traffic signal for it. So there'll be some additional design work that'll have to be done there to look at specifically where that intersects each corner and how the signal functions, with that. But it'll be another cooperative effort, to work through that to get that in.
Fantastic. Appreciate the comments.
All right.
If I could just address that really quickly. As far as the conditions go, we're generally in favor and have no objection to any of the conditions. As it pertains to that crosswalk, we would just add that that condition should have some language that qualifies that it would be subject to approval or agreement with DOT, just because we do, as far as I understand it, we do not have the ability to just unilaterally put a crosswalk in across Independence Boulevard. Now, we're all in favor of having that crosswalk and would be agreeable to being subject to the condition as long as there's some language in there that says that it would have to be approved and agreeable with DOT for us to move forward with that. Because obviously one highlight of our project is to have that pedestrian walkability and to funnel that pedestrian traffic across Independence Boulevard, towards that commercial center where the Harris Teeter is located.
Wouldn't that be and I guess this is to Brian, to his point, wouldn't that be coming out of the TRC, would kind of determine ultimately where that crosswalk may go?
He's correct that DOT would have to agree to any improvement in a DOT right-of-way. I think I'd defer to our transportation folks as to whether they believe DOT would be in favor or against that crosswalk. But yes, they are correct.
Good evening again. This is Scott James with the WMPO. That is correct. We coordinate the conditions of approval for the TIAs when they include DOT facilities. We coordinate that approval with the DOT conditions. So specific to any improvements on a DOT roadway, they endorse them before they become a TIA condition.
We'll add that in to the conditions. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess we'll defer to the other board or our attorney if that condition needs to be rewritten. I don't know.
We just add that to the language at the end of the sentence. I was just going to want to, are you all right with that? Just as.
I feel like I covered that with my hard stop question. Because he said already, the DAC, you're going to do whatever the TIA recommends.
Yeah, part of the conditions of our DAC approval of our preliminary plan required us to do what was ever required of us in the TIA. So, to your point, if the TIA required us to put that crosswalk and a pedestrian signal in as this condition proposes, we would be required to do that. I think our concern would just be having a condition tied to our current application that did not include some language that it would be tied to the DOT or subject to the DOT approval.
So I'm sorry, now I just got to make sure I'm clear on this. So, but I'm sorry, would you mind coming back?
It may be that it's not needed if you have the DAC requirement that we comply with the TIA improvements.
I don't have initials after my name, so I have no idea. But my question is, I thought you just said, if I understood correctly, please, DOT has essentially already said yes because it was a stipulation in the TIA?
Yes, Commissioner, it may be clearer to say the WMPO would not issue a condition that the DOT would not support for a DOT roadway. We wouldn't write that down. It would not be proposed.
Okay, so you're not asking for something that somebody else has to sign off on without knowing
Correct.
that they're in agreement?
Our expectation is when the DOT signs off on the approval with conditions letter, they will also be signing off on any improvements on a DOT roadway.
Thank you.
I just wanted to clarify, just one minor thing. That's correct. We don't have that final TIA kind of letter yet that DOT's looked at, so that's why I think what Colin was basically saying, for now, we just want to make sure it's subject to DOT approval. What Scott is saying is correct. When they issue their final letter, if it says install the crosswalk, then DOT has reviewed it and everything's good, but we don't know that 100% at this point, so that's why what Colin was asking for, maybe that just ending on the condition that just says subject to DOT approval. But we are expecting to get that clarified here shortly.
It sounds like it might be a little redundant, but I don't have a problem with it.
Okay, yeah. I don't think it's a big deal, but just want to make sure.
All right. Anything else for, that was okay. Anything else for the applicant right now? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.
At this time, we will open the public hearing on agenda item number 2. And we will start with anyone who's here to support item number 2, and that will, the time limit is 10 minutes. And then we'll go to anyone who's here to speak in opposition, and that group will have 10 minutes. So if you are here to speak in favor of agenda item number 2, come on up to the podium. Anyone here to speak in favor? Okay. Is there anyone present who wishes to speak in opposition? And start with your name and address, and just make sure you've signed in with Ms. Bradshaw.
Yeah, I did. My name is Trish Ryu. I live at 754 Wharton Avenue. I'm a member of the Independence and River Road Traffic Committee. We recently presented information to the mayor, city council, and city engineers on the rapid increase in traffic volume along Independence Boulevard between Carolina Beach Road and River Road as a result of the significant development in this area over the past 5 years. And for clarification, it's probably less than a mile from Carolina Beach Road to River Road. The mayor acknowledged that widening this section of Independence to 4 lanes, along with other traffic control measures suggested by several traffic impact analyses that have been done in recent years, should be a priority. In response, WMPO appears to be adding this project to its list of suggested improvements for the upcoming NCDOT statewide traffic improvement plan. We have also submitted a petition with 1,000+ signatures of homeowners in the areas who are concerned about traffic. While we applaud this acknowledgement and appreciate the heightened awareness of the need, adding more high-density housing to this area in the interim and prior to any improvements being made is irresponsible. Any further development in this area that has not already been approved should be predicated on completion of widening Independence Boulevard to 4 lanes, adding a roundabout or traffic light at the intersection of Independence and River Road, creating more turn lanes at key neighborhood entry-exit points, and connecting the sidewalk from the Antigua Apartments to Echo Farms for pedestrian and bike traffic. This agency, along with the City Council and others, have the authority to require developers to be more responsible. You have a fiduciary responsibility to act in the best interest of the taxpayers of New Hanover County. We ask that you do a better job. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else here to speak in opposition? How's our time? We're about 7.5 minutes in, or there's 7.5 minutes left? Okay, 7.5 minutes left.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you for all hearing me. Appreciate y'all allowing me to speak tonight. I'm a resident of Southgate, which is the...
Sir, can you give us your name?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Joseph Peterson. I'm a resident of 451 Hollins Road. I've been there 21 years. If you all are familiar with Carolina Beach Road, if you're heading towards Carolina Beach, if you're at Independence, it's a very busy intersection since we got the new Harris Teeter. And my biggest concern, I'm welcome the development. My biggest concern is the egress and access. Where Southgate is, when you come out to make a right onto Carolina Beach Road, because it's almost impossible to take a left heading towards downtown. There's a Presbyterian church, and then there's a turn lane for Independence. Ever since River Lights come in, we're in 911 in that area. I don't know if you all are from the south side, have been to the south side, but Independence is a mess. You've got 1,000+ houses in River Lights serviced by a 1-lane road. It's 2 lanes, 1 lane going each way. If you've ever been there at 3 o'clock in the afternoon to 5, you wait 15, 18 minutes. I'm sure you're all familiar with some of the other areas where you've got to wait. This is beyond ridiculous because River Lights is so congested now with all the development, and no one thought to open that corridor up. We need to halt all development in that area until, like the first speaker says, that road needs to be widened. We need 4 lanes. This dream of the engineer saying we're going to do it, they're going to have people come out and make a right on Carolina Beach Road and do a U-turn at Carolina Beach Road is what the engineer suggested. This has been completely overlooked. This area is, you can't right in, right out. If they take a right on Independence, they're heading towards gridlock at River Road, and they're gonna whip into Indy West or whatever the apartments are and do a U-turn and come back. The same goes if you come out to Carolina Beach Road. You're gonna be forced to make a right, and you're either gonna have to make another right on the Independence or go straight down Carolina Beach Road towards Echo Farms area, and there's no U-turn provision within the road. You'd have to take St. Andrews or something like that and get over to 17 and come back. So y'all really need to look at this area and this right to right, and the U-turns in Carolina Beach Road was the engineer's suggestion. No disrespect, but I think that's preposterous. You know, this whole area with, like the first speaker said, we've got to figure out that. And understand we need more apartments, and this is a great development. They've done a nice job with the lay of the land, but we need to get the traffic in and out. If we can solve that issue, I'm all for it. But we can't be adding, this is 200 plus units. That's, most people have 2 cars, that's gonna be 500 cars. They make 2 trips a day, that's 1,000 trips. I'm not an engineer, but that's a lot of traffic that we're putting onto a 2-lane road, which is directly across, they don't show it here, but that's directly across from the new Harris Teeter entrance.
3.5 minutes.
Which is already a mess. Thank you.
Thank you. 3.5, is that what you? 3:15, okay. Start with your name and address and make sure you've signed in.
I am. My name's Alan Warwick. I'm a lifelong resident of this intersection right here at 214 Solid Hollow Lane. The previous 2 speakers are absolutely correct. The idea of trying to put a U-turn on Carolina Beach Road is bonkers. It's just as bonkers as calling something Midtown when it's south of South Gate. It's just as bonkers as completely ignoring that waterway coming off of Pershing Avenue to the north, where I grew up playing with Venus flytraps. And while it does look like they are trying to preserve that specific area, I really don't think putting a 250 unit rent farm is going to really help preserve the nature of us being a tree city. All I see here is, you know, like I said, 1,000 more cars, less home ownership, less investment in the community, and more exploitation and more begging for just a wider lane. Could we maybe get the bridge to the south that we were hoping for that would alleviate all that traffic that's heading north to south? Like, have we completely given up on getting another bridge? Because that's really what we're looking at is a complete congestion just to get to the north side of town from the complete south side of town. Could we also look into maybe the county property that's to the west and adding another ingress through to River Road? Because that's all county owned all the way to River Road, but we're not considering trying to make any kind of easement to 1,000 more cars to this one intersection. I've seen wrecks at Carolina Beach Road and Independence almost every single day this past summer. Like, it's really, really bad. It's not okay. I'll cede the rest of my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Warwick. Anyone else here to speak in opposition? There's 1 minute left on the clock. I'll make it quick.
I'll try to. My name is Christine Pierce, and I live at 121 Southgate. There's not very many people here to represent Southgate at all, but the only in and out is on Carolina Beach Road. That's it. In and out, only one access in and out. And I know we're not talking about my development, but the traffic is really bad. And anyway, the traffic really needs to be addressed. However it's done, whether it's a crosswalk, a bridge, the roundabout down on Independence would be really good. If there was another way to go out even Southgate to Sunnyvale, that way might be an idea, I don't know, but
Thank you.
I
That's
just
the
have
time.
a question too. There's a dotted line at the top. My property goes next to the Presbyterian Church, but the dotted line behind those homes on Southgate, there's a dotted line and then there's a broken line. Who owns that? What is that? What is that on the map? It's county owned? Okay. Thank you. Thank you for listening to me. Thank
for
you.
coming out. And the public hearing is closed. Does the applicant have anything to address some of the concerns that were raised?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be brief. Obviously, we've heard from some folks in opposition today, and primarily what is consistent in their complaints is regarding the traffic on Carolina Beach Road and Independence Boulevard. And as we've discussed here tonight in previous matters, the traffic is an inherent problem throughout our community. It's not unique to this particular area. It's not unique to Independence Boulevard and Carolina Beach Road and that intersection. It's something that all of us are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And the applicant in this particular property presents some unique issues that we've already discussed, whether that's topographical or locationally here. We are located right there at that intersection, and we do have two means of ingress and egress for right in and right out. But the plan is, and the idea would be that Independence Boulevard would be the primary entryway and exit way for the development. I do think that there will be some difficulties trying to turn right on Carolina Beach Road and swing across that traffic into a U-turn lane, and I think that folks are going to figure that out rather quickly and not attempt or utilize that for that means. It's more than likely they're going to turn right onto Independence Boulevard and then have to pull a U-turn to go back out to the signal at Carolina Beach Road if they want to go north on Carolina Beach Road. Again, these are not created by the applicant. In fact, the applicant's willing and has offered to try to do through the TIA whatever he can to help alleviate those concerns. The other issue that was brought up, dealing with some of the buffering, and I did have a slide. Let me see if I can show where that is. I'm not sure where it is on my plan. But as you can see, I mean, we are keeping a considerable buffer between Southgate and the development. And here you can see where those area where Pershing Road is, as well as Indy West. There's already wetlands. There's trees there. And we're not really able to cross over that if we were going to try to make an area of ingress and egress. I'm just trying to hit a couple of different things here that were brought up. So from a buffering standpoint, we're required to have a 20-foot wide buffer, and we've exceeded that. It's approximately 40 feet to the property line and 110 feet from any of the buildings. So any of the existing trees that are located already within that buffer, they're going to stay. And as Brian pointed out in the staff report, there's an additional 30 feet that's created by virtue of that kind of separating property line that is indicated by the hash mark on the site plan. And this is obviously the wetlands, but you can see where there's that separation. So that's an additional 30 feet. Those trees there are 60 feet high. The 4-story buildings are approximately 45 feet high. So the buffer of 60-foot trees that are there are going to stay there. We've worked really, really hard to conserve as much as possible. And as I said, this really dictated our plan. We've got over 7 acres of tree protection on this site. That's over 30% of the total acreage on the site. So we've been very environmentally sensitive in the design. It's caused some difficulties, but we felt that it was in the best interest of the neighbors. That was indicated in our community meeting, where we presented this site plan and asked for feedback, and there were no requests for us to make any changes coming out of that community meeting. And we felt like that was about the best endorsement that we could get at that particular time, that they were very satisfied with what we were presenting. Again, if there's any questions from the board, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Mr. Kiffer?
Colin, just one quick question. Will you go to the other slide you had up a second ago before this one?
Was it the web?
No, it was the topo map.
Oh, it's back this way, I think.
That slide, yeah.
Sure.
What I read in your packet, and I can't remember what was the problem or challenge with interconnectivity with Pershing Court.
Yeah, so Pershing Court, obviously, we've got that little strip that you can see that doesn't connect. So our property, that the project site doesn't connect all the way across. We'd have to somehow cross over a piece of property that is owned by a third party, number one. Number two, it's located directly where that wetlands area is, as the gentleman in opposition already stated, you know, as called it a water feature or whatnot. It is a substantial wetland, and it would pose some very particular and unique issues to connect a roadway into that area. So those are two of the main problems with trying to connect.
Thank you.
And I'll be honest, just to finish that, you know, in our community meeting, the neighbors were pretty adamant that they were not interested in connecting. So.
Anything else for the applicant? Well, the neighbors lucked out with that random easement, because I would have liked to seen a connection too, and with the wetlands there, that wouldn't be good to disturb those. My concern is for the units that only have one way out. After that, in the last section, how many units is that in the last, like, 2 apartment buildings and 3 townhouse clusters?
Are we talking about the area that's closer to the Independence Boulevard exit?
Yeah, where the cursor is. Whoever's driving that, where the cursor is. So they have.
This area right
There's just a little bit of area where they only have one way to get out. They're kind of. We usually look at that. At first, I thought it was more buildings, but I see you've got the parking. They could cut through the parking to have another way out, so they're not isolated back there.
So the idea is that the road is free-flowing and circular. It is a cul-de-sac type road, as you can see, and it is to flow through the parking area back along the same way in which you came in. Obviously, you've got a couple of different options, but eventually you've got to get back to where you were previously. We did have to go to DAC for that particular design element because it is a waiver from the technical requirements from the city of Wilmington to have that type of design. But again, dealing with some of the unique characteristics of this property and having to get ourselves back from the far corner of the site to Independence and to Carolina Beach Road required us to do it in this way in order to save as much of the open space and tree preservation as possible. We weren't really interested in trying to just make crossing roads for no reason, essentially, if we could do it this way.
Gotcha. Anyone else? Okay, thank you. How are we feeling about this one? Commissioner Adams?
I'll start out by saying that, I mean, this is, in my opinion, a very sensitively done site plan, not just in how it responds to the wetlands and the topography, but also how it very intentionally creates a streetscape with parallel parking and terminates in public spaces, and the buildings, you know, relate to it. I think it's a really good move to hold the corner at Carolina Beach and Independence Road with architecture and building, and that's where your, primarily looks like your mix of uses is happening. But I still haven't heard anything yet to understand how there's realistic, functional site ingress and egress here from a vehicular point of view. I mean, the fact that Mr. Stevenson said that the assumption is that 95% of the traffic is not going west on Independence, but that's part of the scoping letter. I don't understand yet how real-world traffic deals with that degree of assumption going north on Carolina Beach or east on Independence. And I know that this is ongoing and you're working with DOT and MPO, but as you describe some of the potential or assumed traffic movements, I'm just really struggling to understand how that works yet. And I know it's a funky site and it's got a real small pinch point with these roads, but a great site plan that has little to no functional traffic accessibility, I don't know, I'm really struggling with that.
Commissioner Lennon?
I'm not trying to be snarky, but my comment would be then there must really be a demand for apartments. And respectfully, I would distinguish, I think internally, agree with the chair's point a little bit, but I think internally, I think there's flow. It's the ingress is not the issue, it's the egress. So, and I think that's relevant because there are two well-traveled roads, according to staff, not at capacity. Y'all have probably figured out since you've been here all night, I'm not very sensitive to the traffic discussions. We don't really have traffic here. We have to sit through a couple light cycles. That's it. I drive to work the same way everybody else does. So we've got to, and I think it's important to point out that even with those limitations and researching the other potential access points, they still want to do this. So I don't think, I agree with everybody, I don't think somebody's going to take their life into their own hands and attempt to turn left out of either one of these. And yet still there's a demand to build them.
Thank you, Commissioner Lennon. And there's the responsibility of the Planning Commission is to look at what could be built there, the most intense use that could be built there versus what's being proposed. And to continue discussion about the ingress and egress, that's going to happen no matter what is built there. That's just, funky site is the term you use, Commissioner Adams. It is a funky site. The wetlands have been preserved. We don't usually see this much green on the site plans that come before us for rezoning, so I commend your design there. All this area is 23.33 acres. All the good sites are not available anymore. So this is the reality of building a project of this size in Wilmington right now. So there's a lot, in a lot of cases, that happens all over town. I used to live on Market Street. I sometimes couldn't make a left. I turned down, I made a right, and I went into a hair salon parking lot, and I came back out to go where I needed to go. You do what you need to do to get where you need to go. In Leland, they make U-turns all day long to make lefts. They make a right to make a left. So that doesn't concern me considering all the other benefits of this project.
Can I comment on that from one who is, of the folks up here on the dais, has probably lived here the least amount of time? You and Commissioner Lennon have made great points about, and I'll paraphrase, Chicago has bad traffic. New York City, Boston has bad traffic. But my point is those are the people that are moving this way. So their expectations are that we are going to have some type of foresight to try to anticipate some of those needs, because, we've sat here now since 6 o'clock and, have had very interesting and very substantial discussion. The preponderance of that discourse has been around traffic. And are we, I can't help wondering, are we reaching that point where traffic, perceptively or real, is now butting up against the need to satisfy the need for more housing, more affordable housing, et cetera, because we haven't really spent that much time talking about the merits of the, what's inside the plot lines here. Same as with the prior discussion. I feel like we've talked about traffic a lot. So it's real in perceptively or reality, it's real. So, are we reaching that apex as a group of planning professionals that, that's something we need to go deal with? I don't know. I'm just, like I say, but I've lived here the least amount of time, and I'm just thinking about the people, as Commissioner Lennon accurately pointed out. People are coming, and got it. That's not even negotiable. People want to move here, so how do we incorporate that? So I don't know the answer to this one. I really don't. That's why I asked earlier about how far is this intersection from, River Lights and, River Road and Independence, because if we're ignoring that traffic may be going down that far then to get back into town, then that intersection needs to be improved, like yesterday. Those are the things that I think are key to developments like this, because it's going to get developed, should get developed. It fits a need, a housing need, but we've got to solve the traffic piece. Real or perceptive traffic issues, we've got to solve that.
Mr. Koffer?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and all the other comments we've heard. Just start with, applaud the residents of the Southgate area and Independence, Carolina Beach Road that are an advocate for the area. You've got your petitions, you're communicating with the city council. I mean, that's democracy at work, and that's what you got to be a part of the solution. And I think you guys are doing a great job. That's very admirable. Looking at this site, I feel like like the last one, I mean, it checks all the boxes for our comprehensive plan. I mean, it checks all the boxes for our growth strategies map. As Madam Chair stated, by right, R15, I think I did the math of, about 133 units with 66 single-family houses and 66 ADUs. I mean, no matter what, it's private property and these folks can develop it. And by right, they could have 166 units there effectively. So this is, as Commissioner Adams said, I mean, when our Madam Chair said that, when you look at a project like this on such a unique piece of land with so many topographical challenges, to see so much open space and tree preservation and a mix of products, the different bedrooms, along with a great transition from single family to higher density in an urban core, a little, a neighborhood node where there's shopping and, live, work, and walk to all the different, commercial ingredients of that area. I'd be leaning towards an approval here on this one for sure.
Any other discussion? Commissioner Lennon?
I don't want anybody to think that I'm not sensitive to the traffic issue, but I think that the answer is not to stop developing. It's just not. It's nonsensical. So the people to lobby are the city, if it's city-owned, and the state, if it's state-owned. North Carolina owns second highest mileage of roads in the country. So those are both state roads. Pretty sure I'm right, right?
Carolina Beach Road is a state road. Independence is a city-maintained road.
Which takes me back to my earlier point of Independence and River should have been resolved a long time ago. And those of you who watch this and are really bored have heard me say before, mysteriously, somehow, that got extended, and nobody wants to take credit for that. But that intersection should have been resolved years ago, and somebody felt like it was okay to extend it. So the answer is not to stop the development. The answer is to get the roadway issues addressed, and I also would be in favor of this when it comes time.
All right, it's time. What is the will of the commission? Are you making a motion, or okay. Commissioner Woodruff?
I'm ready to make a motion.
Great.
With regard to agenda item number 2, the request of property at 3818 Carolina Beach Road and 3930 Independence Boulevard to rezone from R15 to MD17 Conditional District. This request is consistent with the objectives and policies of the following plans adopted by the City of Wilmington: Create Wilmington Comprehensive Plan. Planning Commission considers its approval to be reasonable and in the public interest because the proposed rezoning would allow for compatible infill development, provide for an increase in residential density near services and along an identified transit route, and preserve a significant amount of natural area and open space. Therefore, the Planning Commission recommends approval of this request, along with the staff recommended conditions 1 through 6, with the suggested modification to number 6 to read: A, DOT approves signalized pedestrian crosswalk to be required by TIA shall be provided across Independence Boulevard at the intersection of Independence Boulevard and Carolina Beach Road.
Well done. Do we have a second? All right. Agenda item number 2, we have a
Can I ask Commissioner Woodruff for a modification? Just drop the last piece off where you're saying it's got to be at the intersection of Carolina Beach and Independence, because DOT could come back and say, no, move it down. Does that make sense?
Fine with me.
Okay.
I'll still second it.
All right. We've got a motion to approve agenda item number 2. Any further discussion? All right, we'll do a voice vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Motion carries 6-0. 6-0. Good luck with your project. Thank you. All right, on to agenda item number 3, which is some LDC maintenance to amend the Land Development Code for various amendments and cleanup items related to landscaping and cross-access. And we have our director up at the podium, Linda Painter, to deliver the staff report. Welcome.
Good evening, Madam Chair and Commission members. This evening's proposed amendments to the Land Development Code were originally presented to you as part of the April package of amendments, and at the recommendation of the Commission, they were deferred to allow staff to work with 2 members of the Commission to refine those amendments. So we have been working with Commissioners Lennon and Pollock for the last several weeks to refine the proposed amendments, which will address cross-access requirements for commercial parking lots, revised parking lot shade coverage requirements, and revised parking lot landscaping requirements. The first proposed amendment before you deals with cross-access requirements. This requirement was originally introduced as part of the new Land Development Code in 2021. It requires all non-residential properties to provide cross-access between those parking lots to limit vehicle conflicts on roadways and provide drivers with the ability to make multiple stops without the need to enter traffic. And one of the things that we've discovered several challenges during implementation. First of all, these easements or cross-access connections are not necessarily needed or practical along some of our secondary collector streets. They apply to all non-residential developments regardless of size or scale of the proposed development. And we have no administrative relief. So if there are challenges in actually making that connection, the applicant would have to go to the Board of Adjustment and seek a variance to that requirement. Additionally, we didn't provide a lot of detail on the easements that are associated with the connection requirement. In your packet, you do have some benchmarking that staff performed to look at other communities that have been doing this for a long time. And so the proposal that you see before you really incorporates some of the key provisions from those other communities. The first change we're proposing is that we will limit applicability of the standard to corridors that are subject to specific frontage requirements that are shown on the map. The sole exception to that is Wrightsville Avenue because it already has very specific frontage standards that are applied to it and is very different from the other corridors that you see. We are also proposing to establish minimum thresholds for implementation, either for new development, new principal buildings, or for 50% increase in floor area across a site would trigger the requirement. We are proposing that both the planning director and city engineer would have the ability to modify or eliminate the requirement if it met certain criteria that are proposed as part of the amendment. And I do want to clarify this would take both my approval as well as the city engineer. So we would have to concur, and if anyone disagreed with our decision, they would be able to appeal that to the Board of Adjustment just like they would any other administrative decision. We've also added language that details the requirements associated with the easements for long-term maintenance. Before I move on to shading, are there any questions on cross-access?
I have a quick question, and while I have the mic, I'll say thank you to Commissioner Lennon and Commissioner Pollack for taking extra time to work with staff on this. Appreciate all your hard work. It's the heavy lifting that staff does. I have a question about the street-specific frontages and how they're selected. Is there a way that a road can grow into that? Like I noticed that South 17th Street all the way to Market and beyond is included, but not South 16th Street where they're both one way. And Independence and Shipyard seem to kind of be moving in that direction. Is that something that's fluid or?
It is. This is something, one of the decisions as we worked with the commissioners on this was that rather than create a new map and identify specific corridors where only cross-access would apply, was we opted to use an existing figure that is already in the code that identifies specific frontage requirements for those streets. That is a figure just like any other part of the land development code that should the commission and the council determine in the future that we need to add those similar frontage standards to other corridors, we can make that change to that map and to that figure.
But I'm sorry, to that point, that's a process, right?
Correct. It's the same process we're going through today.
Right. It's not just a random, oh, this is now one of those roads. Yeah.
Okay.
And if I could, Madam Chair, just the other thing I think that, this is my term, but having the release valve of the collaboration between city engineer and the planning director was a big part of this, I think, because one of the things you through our work session, what ifs, we can't plan for everything, and having the ability to have somebody provide relief for whatever the unusual situation is that we can't think of was a good alternative.
Yeah, I like that there was more room for staff to make some of those decisions and waivers. So please continue unless anybody has anything on that.
All right. Moving on, the Second Amendment addresses shading requirements, and I will say there is a relationship between Amendments 2 and 3, but I'm going to deal with them separately, and then we'll take questions at the end of this section. So as this slide indicates, the shading requirements were established to meet multiple purposes. They're identified on the slide. I think you also heard testimony earlier this evening regarding the city's urban forestry plan and the fact that we have seen a decrease in canopy. One of the other things that was identified as part of the forestry plan was that the number one concern of participants and feedback that we received as part of the development of that plan was the impact of development on tree canopy. So there is a specific recommendation that is moving forward to address increasing tree canopy across the city and protecting it, that we provide incentives to private property owners to preserve trees on their sites. So one of the things that you'll see this evening is I think we are trying to address that as part of this. I will note that that study also indicates that the primary reasons for the loss of tree canopy is not just private development, that's one of three. The other is Hurricane Florence and just the natural mortality of larger trees. So there were three main reasons identified for that loss of canopy. The proposed amendment that we are looking at will address not only the concerns of continuing to focus on preserving and increasing our canopy coverage, it also addresses some concerns that were identified by the development community through the implementation of the ordinance. What you see before you, Table 18-318, is our current canopy coverage requirements. One item that it became clear that we needed to clarify is that these standards only apply to impervious surfaces that are for parking areas and vehicular use areas. It does not apply to impervious surfaces created by buildings or to permeable areas where you're using permeable surfaces for parking and other items. So that was something we learned that was unclear, and some of those in the development community were actually coming up with higher shade coverage requirements because they were including building coverage in that. The second item that was identified was that there was an inequity. The table that is shown on the screen essentially created different standards in terms of shade coverage percentage required for vehicular use areas based on the sizes of the property that was being developed. We do also distinguish between inside the 1945 corporate limits and outside the 1945 corporate limits. And the concern that was raised is that developers who have the larger projects, so 100,000 square feet or more, where they're already putting in more trees just by virtue of the sheer size of the development and shading, were being held to a higher standard than any other property. So what we are recommending is actually deleting this table as it stands today and replacing it with the shaded percentages that you see, which would be a minimum of 15% required shading within the 1945 corporate limits and 35% shading outside the corporate limits. So this table would go away and be replaced with a new standard that simply says, here is your shade coverage requirement and how to calculate that. The third item that the amendment addresses is providing a greater range of option to meet shade coverage while also providing incentives to preserve existing trees on the site. So the two shaded cells that you will see on the new table 18-318 represent the shade allotments that we currently provide for understory and canopy trees. And what you will see is that we are proposing adding new increased credit requirements if you are preserving trees, so that we're giving you more credit for shade based on the fact that tree is already existing. And then also, if you are doing those trees on an internal median, you will get additional credit because we're recognizing that's providing more shade to the impervious area than a tree on the perimeter of the site, or the perimeter of the parking area would. So there are some reductions there, but overall, we are providing some more flexibility here. And as we move into the next amendment, you will see how we've made some other adjustments to address the concern about the ability to meet shade coverage and parking lot landscaping requirements while also providing the desired amount of parking based on market demand. So currently, when it comes to parking lot landscaping, in addition to the shade coverage requirements, we also have requirements that you have to have a landscape island every 12 spaces. You have to have a canopy tree in that landscape island, and that island must provide a minimum soil volume of 1,000 cubic feet, which comes out to about 17.5 feet wide by 19 feet long. This was causing an issue in terms of, think of the size of those islands and the frequency of those islands. And so staff went back, and since we're really trying to look at this in a sense of how do we get the shade coverage in the parking area and how do we ensure that we are providing adequate soil for trees to thrive and grow so that we actually start seeing that canopy develop, we are proposing replacing those inflexible standards with a requirement that you provide at least one landscape island, or at least one tree for every 12 spaces, and this is a mathematical calculation, so it's not on your site plan. It's simply, if you have 144 parking spaces, you need to provide at least 12 trees within that area. 75% of those trees must be canopy trees. In terms of location, parking spaces must be within 70 feet of a canopy tree. So how you accomplish that, that can be along the perimeter of your site, it can be in an island, it can be in a median. But we are providing different options and flexibility for developers to meet that. The soil volume requirements, we are retaining the 1,000 cubic feet for canopy trees. We are providing a lower volume for understory trees, recognizing that smaller trees need smaller soil volume requirements, so it didn't make sense for us to keep 1,000 cubic feet for those smaller trees. We are clarifying that that soil volume does need to be root accessible and non-compacted soil, and providing credits for soils that are located under pervious pavement. So if you put pervious pavement adjoining your island, that will help you meet that 1,000 cubic feet, which gives you the ability to have some parking and have a smaller island as long as it is not less than 144 square feet. So with that, summarize the proposed amendments. Any additional questions?
I bet Commissioner Adams is ready to weigh in on this one.
I don't have any questions, but I, again, just want to thank, our two commissioners for helping. And I think, again, this does a lot to provide flexibility both for developers and designers to comply with the intent of what these things are trying to do as goals. The only question I have is, what is the special sauce about 1945 and why that year triggers so many different things about the LDC? Does anyone know the answer to that?
I'm going to turn to our Assistant Director for assistance with that.
I'm not an expert in special sauce, but the 45 is the historic city boundary that's got a more urban grid. It's where the traditional city was kind of laid out. Outside of the 45, it turns more suburban. You've got more winding roads. You don't have a traditional grid pattern. It's just a different development pattern you see.
I'll buy into that sauce.
Commissioner Lennon?
Were these final revisions sent back to the folks that helped, the professionals that helped us too? Okay.
Yes.
All right. And thank you. I would just say, for what it's worth, Madam Chair, this, in my mind, worked. We got a lot more done with the four of us sitting in a room kind of talking through it. Now, to be fair, after the workshop that we all did, to kind of go through the issues a little bit.
No offense taken.
I didn't mean it like that.
Any other questions for staff? Comments? All right. And the city is the applicant, so we don't have another presentation. Any comments on this? If not, I would love to know the will of the commission.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the request.
Madam Chair, I know it's a formality, but you do have to open and close that public hearing.
Public hearing. That's right, for all you people here that I overlooked. Sorry about that. It's late. Thanks for having my back on that, Brian. We're going to open the public hearing for agenda item number 3. Is there anyone here to speak on agenda item number 3? Anyone here to speak on agenda item number 3? The public hearing is now closed. And so I will ask at an appropriate time, what is the will of the commission?
I'd like to once again make a motion for approval of agenda item number 3, Land Development Code Maintenance Amendments for Cross-Access, Shade Coverage, and Parking Lot Requirements. This request is reasonable and consistent with the objectives and policies of the following plans adopted by the City of Wilmington, the Create Wilmington Comprehensive Plan. The proposed amendments will correct issues discovered during implementation of the Land Development Code and help reinforce the overall goals of the comprehensive plan.
Thank you. Commissioner Adams has made a motion to approve agenda item number 3. Is there a second? Commissioner Woodruff, the second. We'll do a voice vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Motion carries 6-0. All righty. Anything else from the commission this evening? Anything from the staff?
No, ma'am.
It's merciful of you. Seeing no further Ms. Painter?
I'm sorry. I do have 2 announcements. One, I would like to introduce Miranda France. She is the new Associate Planner in Development Review, so she is taking Patrick O'Many's position. And we also sadly said goodbye to Jeff Walton last week. Jeff has decided to take another opportunity and has left the city after 18 years, and he will be missed.
Wow, thank you for the updates. All right, if there's no further business, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourned.
Commissioner Pollack has made a motion to adjourn. Do we have a second? With the second? Any further discussion? No. Do we have, we'll do a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed to that one? We are adjourned. Have a lovely evening.